The table saw, one of the most powerful tools you can add to your shop, but it's also one of the most dangerous if not used correctly. Over the years, I've made plenty of mistakes, found some awesome upgrades, and learned a lot of tips that I've compiled into this one compilation video to help you get cleaner cuts, work safer, and all around enjoy using the table saw. Let's go. No SawStop, no problem. I'm gonna share 13 mistakes you should avoid when using the table saw to avoid injury. Then I'll share with you 5 tools that I think you should have for the table saw to make it safer and more efficient. And then I'll share some personal protective equipment everyone should have, but very few ever tell you about, especially the one. Let's go. Do not mistake this as an anti-SawStop. I think they are absolutely amazing machines. If you like them and they're in your budget, I actually recommend them. I have a SawStop. I think they're fantastic machines, both in build quality and safety. However, not everyone wants a SawStop for a few reasons. A, just based on principle, they don't like SawStop, okay? 2, they're outside a lot of people's budgets because they are much more expensive than other type saws. And then D, some people just like other brands like Harvey or Grizzly or Powertec or DeWalt or Milwaukee, so not everyone just wants that SawStop brand. But all table saws should be operated with safety, no matter if you have that technology on there that stops that blade or not. Let me show you. Did I say 13? I meant 14. First thing you should do is remove any oversized or loose-fitting clothing, especially that has sleeves, or if you're wearing a hoodie that has those strings. Those things got to come off if you're going to be around spinning blades. I've seen some very gnarly accidents, especially at a miter saw, because of a loose-fitting sleeve. Same thing goes with the table saw. Or if you wear bracelets, I like wearing bracelets, but I try to take those off, or I do take those off if I'm going to be working around these spinning blades. It's just not worth the risk. After you make sure you don't have any loose-fitting clothing, what you need to do is set up the table saw correctly so that it's going to cut straight and accurate, because if you don't, it can cause some kickback issues and other things. So what I like to do is make sure that these slots on your table saw, no matter if you have 1 or 2, just make sure that one of the slots is aligned with that blade. And I just use a combination square, and you can see here, I just make sure that it touches exactly the same or has the exact same gap all the way across. It's not rocket science, but as long as that right there looks perfectly, well, I say perfect, as long as that looks really, really close, that means this blade is square to the slot. Next thing you need to do is make sure that this fence is also aligned to the slots. If they're not, there should be some adjustments you can make to your table saw to adjust the table to the blade. Almost all saws have it. You'll have to check your manual or just Google the manual online and find it at the manufacturer's website. But you want to make sure those 2 things are lined up. And if you're making 90-degree cuts, ensure that this blade is actually 90 degrees, because a lot of times, even if the indicator over there shows it's on 0, that doesn't mean it's actually at 0. Just double check that, make sure everything's lined up, then you can start making your cuts. Next thing you want to do is make sure that you set this blade correctly. You don't want that blade sticking way up. There's no reason for it to be well past the wood. About, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch max over the blade. Typically you want those gullets or the cutouts of that blade to be right at or just above the piece. That helps clear the wood out and stuff. But there's no reason to have it 1 inch, 2, 3 inches above it. All that does is introduce more chance for your hand to contact that blade. And I would much rather, if an accident's going to happen, I would much rather the blade just be barely sticking above the wood and it cut into me versus 1.5 inches above where it cuts off parts. Like, we don't want that. So just make sure you set that blade height correctly. And speaking of blades, you want to make sure that your blades are sharp. If you're using dull blades and you're having a whole lot of trouble pushing that wood through, you're going to cause yourself more trouble. Because if it's having trouble cutting the wood, it's more likely you're going to wind up with bad cuts, and also it's going to be binding and not wanting to cut. It's more chance for kickback, so a good blade is key. Next up, all modern table saws have riving knives. In other words, that piece of metal that's right behind the blade, that needs to be there at a minimum. Have that on there. That prevents the wood from pinching after it gets cut. Pinching wood is bad. It's going to be a kickback, or a very high chance of a kickback, and we're trying to avoid that at all costs. So make sure you have your riving knife installed. Well, all table saws you buy today will also have a blade guard. If it's possible to use the blade guard, it's highly recommended to use it. I am as guilty as anyone, full disclosure, of not having my blade guard on. I have no excuse. The blade guard should be there if you're using your table saw. There's times when you can't use it, if you're using a CrossCut Sled or some other things. The blade guard also has a riving knife built in, so you don't have to worry about, if the riving knife is there. So it's already there, plus there's a guard over the top of the blade that will just help you keep your hands away from the blade should an accident happen. Also, a lot of your blade guards have anti-kickback pawls, and they're just these little spring-loaded arms. They have little teeth on them, and what that's going to do is if that board tries to go back that way, those teeth will dig in and help prevent that kickback. So it's a good idea to have the blade guard if you can. Next, you want to avoid bowed and or twisted wood when you're trying to cut it on the table saw. It needs to be flat. In other words, it's not twisting or bowed up on the table saw like you see here, this piece of walnut's rocking back and forth. That's going to cause some major issues if you try to cut that, because what's going to happen is you're going to start out and it's going to be like, say, high on the top left side where the blade is contacting it. When you push it through and it twists the other way, that puts too much pressure on the blade and between the wood, it just causes a kickback. That's what's going to happen. You're going to have a bad kickback there, so you need to try to make sure they're all flat, properly milled. And with that, bowed lumber like this 2x4 here, if you're pushing it through and it's touching the fence on the back side and then on the front side it's bowing out, bad news. Another kickback opportunity there. Same thing as if it's the opposite way. You just want to make sure that you don't try to cut a straight line on bowed wood. It just doesn't work. One way to joint those boards, I've got a jointing jig video I'll drop in the description, but you can rip one edge of that with the jointing jig like this. It works really well. You get one flat side, then you can use the flat side against the fence and you're good to go for edge jointing. Next thing you want to do is make sure you start your cut off correctly. For one, you never ever make a free-handed cut without the fence. Just don't, no. No, you're not allowed to do that. You do not do that. Now, what you want to do is set the fence properly, whatever thickness you want to cut this board. It's called a rip cut. You're going to rip that width, whatever you got the fence set at. Make sure it is laying flat on your table saw when it contacts the blade. Also make sure that you're not starting crooked either to the left or to the right of the fence. It needs to be flat against the fence, flat against the table, then make the cut. No other way. Don't do it any other way. It's just the safest way to do it. Now, since we're making the cut, you want to be aware of where you're standing. You never, ever, ever, ever stand directly between the blade and the fence in this line, because that's where the kickback's going to happen if it's going to happen, the width of this board. So if you're cutting this board and kickback does happen, you need to be to the left, to the left.
Say the left. Come on!
Stand to the left of the blade, push it through. You can stand to the right of the blade, but then you can't really see what's going on because the fence is kind of in the way and you can't keep an eye on and make sure that that board's flat against the fence. You want to make absolutely sure you're on the left and push it through, and if kickback happens, it flies past you and not into you. I actually had a very bad kickback happen to me that could have been worse than it was. So I had a very old table saw. It's called like a Delta Shopmaster. The fence didn't square to the blade. Remember tip number 1 or 2 there? It wasn't square to the blade, and I was trying to cut a piece of crooked 2x4. What happened was it bound up and kicked back, and it hit me right on the hip bone on the right side and caused a massive bruise. Not only that, it hurt like crazy. So that was the most major kickback I've ever had. And that made me very aware of how fast that can happen, and there's nothing you can do about it when it happens. So just be cautious of that. Make sure you're standing off to the side so if it does kick back, it doesn't hit you or anyone behind you. Now when you start cutting the wood, you're going to need a push stick, but you don't necessarily start with a push stick if the board's long enough. And I'm going to show you. Take this board. This is only about maybe an 18-inch board. If I start to cut with this board and I use the push stick too early, it literally just makes it kick up on the front. If that blade is spinning, this ain't good. This ain't good at all, because if it gets too much, it's going to throw it back. So you make sure, what I do is I'll keep my hand back here on this table. I'll push it until we get to where the leverage is on the table, or most of the board is on the table. Then I'll grab the push stick and then we'll push. And there is a better place to put this push stick. You don't want to be over here by the fence on wider boards, because what that does, it actually works, again, leverage. When you're pushing on this corner, it's going to cause it to kick out at the top, even if slightly. So what you want to make sure you're doing is, I like to push closer to the blade here, not at the blade, but more to the left, or left of center, I guess you would say. And that's going to push most of the pressure, will be pushing up against that fence then you can make your cut safely. This is where I think a lot of people get in serious trouble with the table saw, and this is where a lot of injuries happen that I've seen with videos and what people have told me. When you're making your cut, you've already established how you're pushing it with a push stick, and you get to this point. The cut is done, right? You're through the wood, you've made your cut. Two things that people do that cause the injuries with table saws. One, they reach and grab the offcut piece that on the left side of the blade. There's really no need to do that. If it's there, you can use the push stick to reach around and push it to the left, push it on through, get it out of the way, or turn the table saw off and then touch it. But a lot of people reach and grab that offcut. The second thing people do is if they don't have any outfeed support on the back, you see this board is just going to fall over. And most people don't want that board to fall over because it's going to get damaged. Like that. So what a lot of people do, I've seen it in tons and tons of videos on YouTube that with injuries and without injuries, but they'll reach across the blade and grab that board and pick it up. This is a recipe for disaster. For one, if you don't pick it up correctly, it can kick back, but also your hand is so close to that blade. Your wrist is so close to that blade. You don't want to cut this wrist in that direction with that blade. Bad news. If it cuts deep enough and cuts at the right spot, about 90 seconds you're going to black out. And if nobody finds you, about 3 minutes, you're not going to be with us no more. So it's a very serious, and we'll talk about that more later in the safety equipment. But make sure you don't reach around or across over top of that blade. It's just bad news. Now, talking about reaching over the blade and keeping that piece from falling off, that's why you see so many people with outfeed tables behind their table saw, me included. I have mine slightly lower than my table saw top so that when I do make that cut and I do get to the point to where it's going to tip over, it'll just land on the table. And that's what the outfeed table is for. Now, not everybody has space for an outfeed table. I have a tool that I'm going to show you later that will help you fix that too. If you don't have space for an outfeed table, or if you don't have the budget right now for one or anything like that. But outfeed tables are great. You can get roller stands, fairly cheap, like $20 for a roller stand. And that'll help a little bit, especially if you've got it spaced just right. But outfeed tables or some type of outfeed support will keep you from having to reach over that and care about that board. You're just going to push through the cut. Don't worry about it. Next thing I highly recommend, strongly recommend, if your table saw has it available, some manufacturers like SawStop have them available, and some you can buy third party on Amazon, Etsy, etc., or zero clearance inserts. I actually bought some from my old Delta table saw on Etsy made out of MDF. So a lot of people are making these for third parties, but what that does is it keeps the small pieces, like if you're ripping thin strips and things, from getting jammed down in between the blade or falling down in there, and it's going to make a cleaner cut on your table saw. And I think they make them much safer as well because it's not letting that small piece fall down in there and then become a projectile when it gets caught by the blade. So I really recommend zero clearance if there's available for your table saw. So just search on Etsy and or Amazon or any other manufacturer's website and see if they have them available. I have seen this cut on YouTube more times than I can count, and it makes me so nervous and almost like, it makes my anxiety go sky high when I see it. I see a lot of people making smaller cuts, thinner cuts like this, and they'll have their hand on the fence and then they'll push the board by right here, even if it's only a couple of inches. Man, it makes me so nervous because there's no reason to do that. There's too many other options here. One, you can use a push stick, which is optimal. If the cut is too thin and you can't get a push stick in there, then you shouldn't be cutting it against the fence like that. There's a better option when we get into the tools you can use. I'll show you that, but absolutely don't use your fingers here. I don't like seeing if it's 3 or 4 inches wide and you're making this cut with your hand on the fence. It's just not worth it. There's too much opportunity and chance you're going to get a kickback. And if it kicks back, it's highly likely it's just going to pull your hand towards the blade. And if your hand hits the blade and you don't have the safety technology, bad news. It's going to be a bad day. It's going to be bad months if it cuts in your hand. If you're trying to make thin cuts like this, there's only like a ½ inch between the blade and the fence. There's no way to push that through safely. Yeah, you can use the gripper. I like it. We'll talk about it later. But the better option is to flip it around and cut that offcut on the left side of the blade using something like this thin rip jig. I really like this jig. It's very inexpensive and you can make repeatable cuts with that thin slices. So if you need an 1/8 inch every time, it'll just batch those out for you. And then it keeps you from getting things bound up against the fence, and you can push the stock through safely. All right, one final tip before I get into the tools I highly recommend you get for a table saw. The main tip that I'll share with you about being safe with a table saw is if it doesn't feel right in the gut, don't make the cut. I just made that up right then, y'all. I did. That's got to be a shirt. That's got to be, come on. If it don't feel right in the gut, don't make the cut. It's just, if you have a gut feeling that that's not going to work out or that you're feeling a little hinky about it, I've been there. I've also been there and made the cut and I broke my thumb trying to cut a tiny piece on a miter saw, and I knew I shouldn't do it right before I did it. Just stop. Just stop. There's no reason. There's nothing pressing there. It's not a life and death situation if you make this cut. So just stop, back up, rethink, say, is there a safer way to do this? And then figure it out and make the cut. If it don't feel right in the gut, don't make the cut. All right, now the first tool I think you should get for your table saw that will make things safer and easier on you, I think a feather board. Now there's a bunch of different makers of feather boards out there. I've tried a bunch of them. My favorite's the Bow feather board. I like them a lot. They have some that have this gray insert, some with the black insert. Doesn't really matter what color it is. They work exactly the same. So all of these fit in a standard T-slot. You tighten them down, and as you notice, whenever I'm pushing those boards through, those little teeth on there, or feathers rather, will bend forward toward the blade. If something bound up and it started to kick back, these lock into place and help prevent kickback. Will they stop at 100%? No, but will they help and slow it down? Absolutely. And another great feature is because it's pushing pressure toward the fence, it keeps the stock against the fence and makes your cuts more accurate. That's what I really like about them. Now, one thing about setting these up, always set a feather board up, a horizontal feather board up before the blade. In other words, you never put it at the blade or behind the blade, because then you're just putting pressure on the blade and behind the blade, causing pinching, which causes a kickback. So just before the blade is where you use these feather boards horizontally. I think you need to seriously consider getting some push sticks for your table saw. You say, well, my table saw come with a push stick. This thing is not a good push stick. I made a whole video talking about why. But basically, if these things are, especially if they're subjected to heat and cold, they get brittle. And if they get brittle and it hits that blade, they can literally shatter. And I've had multiple people on that video comment and say that happened to me. And when they shatter, sharp pieces of plastic come back and hit your hand. There's actually a video here I'll show you that shows what happens. Like it could get serious. It really could. And so I really don't like these type of push sticks. I think there's better options available, and these are the three I like. And you don't even have to buy push sticks. You can make your own. There's several different, like you can look around the internet. There's tons of different versions available. This is a popular version. This is a version that my friend makes at All Red Woodworks. And he's got free plans available for this. I'll drop a link down there in the description if you want to get those free plans. Very simple to make. This keeps your hand way away from the blade and keeps pressure down on the bottom. It's got a little foot push. It's just a really nice little design. So if you want to check that out and get free plans for this versus buying one, I use this quite regularly, but I also love having the regular push stick from Bow as well as the micro jig push block. I think having a good variety is always a good option. Again, I like the Bow push sticks. They have a foam insert, so if it gets cut or whatever, as far as a long push stick, this is the ones I use. My favorite push block is the gripper. It's the micro jig gripper. If you've watched YouTube, you've seen these things around. I bought this one years ago, and I use it all the time. I love this thing. It's really good, especially if you have to go over the blade, making some of those shorter cuts like we talked about earlier. It has a little ledge that will drop down so you can get up on this thicker stock and be able to help balance that out. It's just a really good, well-made push block, and I've seen a lot of knockoffs, especially recently on the market. I don't recommend those. Just spend the amount of money, whatever this is currently, it's worth it, whatever it is. I think this is one of the best push blocks on the market, and again, I'll link to everything I'll talk about in the description. This is my favorite. They have a Gripper Go 2 as well. It's basically you don't move anything, everything's already set, but I actually prefer the Gripper, the original, the OG. If you cut a lot of plywood, this thing is awesome. This is the Jessom stock guides. I built this little jig. Actually, my friend over at All Red Woodworks told me about it and sent me the measurements, and I made it off of his measurements. You're just using 2 mag switches, and if you have like a SawStop style table saw with this type of fence, it will literally lock into place with these magnets. It has rollers that are angled toward your fence, so it's pushing the stock toward the fence and they only roll one way, so it does help prevent that kickback as well, and they adjust to basically any size stock. You can use this on hardwoods, thicker woods, plywoods, anything like that. It's just a well-made tool, and if you put it on, go ahead and put it on a jig like this, it hangs up out of the way, it's never in your way. Also, I think if you're cutting a lot of small parts and things like that, and you just need very good accuracy for cross-cutting, in other words, cutting across the grain, I think you should build a CrossCut sled. Doesn't matter whose you use. I have one on my channel. I like it because it's mine. It has safer handles and all that stuff. It's really good for cutting small parts and getting very accurate cuts. There's tons of them available on YouTube as well. I'll link to mine in the description, but all you gotta do is search table saw sled on YouTube. You'll see dozens and dozens of videos. Those are absolutely a must-have for table saws in my opinion. Now, if you don't have a CrossCut sled, a lot of people, especially when I first started, I was very intimidated to try to make one, so I didn't make one for a long time because it would just look like it was an insurmountable mountain that I would never climb. But a good miter gauge is also a great option. And this is the V27 from Incra. It's not that expensive as far as miter gauges go. Some of these things can get up $300–400. This one I think is like $70 or so, give or take. But you can get good accurate results with this because the ones that come with the table saw are usually trash. Unless you buy Harvey, those usually come with a really good one. I'm not associated with Harvey. They have nice miter gauges. But this one is also a really good option. So you can put a faux fence on there to extend this out if you want to. And then also it's just very accurate and for what it does. So you can get good cross cuts with this if you don't want to build a sled. Speaking of repeatable cuts, as far as crosscut goes, if you have this miter gauge and or any miter gauge, and you're going to need to make 2-inch cuts here. You're cutting 2-inch pieces over and over and over and over, whatever the size is, doesn't really matter. A lot of beginners will come over and set their fence on 2 inches, and then they will start making those cuts. The problem is you're going to cause some kickback here because what's going to happen is this piece is going to get bound up in here. You're pushing on this piece. This piece is going to come shooting back. You should never do that. So a better option is you can use anything as a stop block, but these are really good and they're very inexpensive. You use them all the time. They're perfectly square all the way around, so you can use them as a square. It's called a 1, 2, 3 setup block. It is exactly 1 inch thick by 3 inches tall by 2 inches wide. Exactly. You can bank on it. It's close to exact as we need in the wood shop. All you have to do is say we're making 2-inch cuts. We're just going to move our fence over to 4 inches. We're going to move this as our stop block. So when we push this piece of wood up against it, it's going to stop there. Now I can make my cut. There's free space here. It's not going to kick back. I can move that out of the way with a push stick, push it on through, and then come back with the next cut and make it again. That's 2 inches every single time. Or 1 inch or however you want to put those, but they're heavy enough, they stay in place. You can also clamp them in place if you wanted to, but they stay in place because they're nice heavy metal, and so it's just a good option to have. As far as keeping yourself safe, your personal self safe at the table saw, there's a few things that a lot of people recommend and one that nobody recommends that I do. First and foremost, safety glasses. These are 3M brand safety glasses. I like them because they stretch around my big old noggin and they don't fog up, which is key here in a minute. Also, a lot of people recommend hearing protection. It's always a good idea to have hearing protection of some kind. Just make sure it's like OSHA certified, OSHA approved, etc. That way it actually blocks out the right amount of decibels. This is an RZ mask. There's a new M3 model. I have one over in the box. This is the M2 model that I use all the time. M3 is new and improved. It's even better. I just have this one here. They're nice. They fit. They're Velcro back. And they have replaceable filters inside. These are great to keep that fine dust out of your lungs. You should have some of these. Last but certainly not least, I think every woodworker should have a tourniquet. Because, like we talked about earlier, I've said this before in videos, if you cut a major artery, you have about 90 seconds-ish, depending on blood flow, before you black out. And then within 3 minutes or so, you've bled out and you're gonna not be here with us. And we want you here with us. You matter to us. You matter to me. So get a proper name brand cat tourniquet. Now, I'll link to the ones in the description that I recommend that are like real. There's a bunch of knockoffs out there, and the reason you don't want a knockoff is when you put this on and you start tightening it down, if it breaks, you might as well not even bought it because it's what it's for, is to cut off the blood circulation. And they always say high or die. Put it up as high as you can. Tighten it up on the leg, on the arm. Never put it around your neck. It should go without saying, but sometimes you have to say things. And I highly recommend buying 2. Why? Well, I have 3 in here. I have 1 at the toolbox behind you. I have 1 at the miter station, 1 in here, and then I have an extra one, so 4 that you practice with. You don't want to practice with the one that you may need because you don't want to like loosen it up and make it not work right, or even put strain on it where it can be damaged and not work or break. So you can buy, I'm not going to tell you to buy a fake one. Buy 4, 3, 2, whatever you're going to do, minimum 2. Use one to practice with, and then use one. I leave mine on the table saw. You may have seen them in the videos. It stays at the table saw. Make sure it's properly staged. Now, how do you put these on? Well, I'm gonna let a professional show you. There's a link in the description below that tells you how to properly do it. I've shared that video several times. That's what you do. You do what he says, and then practice, practice, practice.
We talking about practice, man.
If you're out here bored and you're thinking of a new project or you're trying to think stuff, make sure you're practicing with these, because muscle memory will kick in when an accident happens. The last thing you want to do is try to figure out how to use it when you need it. You should already know how. Again, I'm a huge proponent of SawStop. I think they're amazing technology. They're extremely safe. I like them. I do. I think that if it's in your budget, you should probably really consider them just based on the safety. However, based on the reasons I stated before, you may not want, this may not be in your budget. You may just have, it's against your principles as a woodworker to even support that company. So it's really up to you on what you buy. I think it's your decision. The number one and easiest upgrade you can make to your table saw is absolutely the blade. The blades they send with most table saws are absolute trash. Even the stock blade that came on the SawStop is not that great. They're trash. They just throw them in there because they can. I don't know. Most table saws are like that. With the exception of the DeWalt job site saw I have here, this blade's actually pretty good for what you're getting. Now there's several different blades to choose from out there, and if you start looking, it gets confusing on what is the best blade for you. I'm gonna give you my picks from good, better, best. Good, a lot of people will kind of frown on this, but the Diablo line of blades are very good for what you're paying for them. They're very inexpensive, and they last a decent amount of time. Now, they will not last as far as sharpness goes as long as some of these other brands, but if you just want one that's in a good budget range, these are good blades. I ran them for years on my old Delta table saw. Kind of the middle of the road, the one that I really go with the most, the one I think most people should buy, is the CMT Chrome Edition blades. I've been running these for a couple of years now, especially a good 50, 60 tooth, 40 tooth all-purpose blade. These are fantastic blades. In that tooth range, 40 to 60 is kind of a combo tooth, so you can do cross cuts and rip cuts and not really have to worry about much tear out. If you're doing a lot of cross cutting or sheet goods, then 80 tooth or so would be better. But for most of us, the 40 to 60 tooth range is perfect. I usually keep a 40 tooth blade on my table saw in most conditions, 40 to 50 tooth depending on which one I can find on sale. There are some really good high-end blades too if you're doing a lot of work, especially like production work, or if you just want to buy once, cry once, get the best of the best. There's two here that I have. I've used this Force blade before. I think it compares really closely to the CMT line. I really wasn't overly impressed with it. One thing that I have liked though is the Ridge Carbide. They did send me this to try out. I've been running it on the table saw for a few weeks now, and I've been very impressed with the quality of this blade, and it's made right here in the USA and by a good small company. So far I like it. I'll link to all of those in the description. You can make your decision on what works best for your saw. While we're on the topic of blades, if you don't have a good dado set, I bought this one myself a couple of years ago, and it has been an absolute awesome thing to have as far as the table saw, especially if you start doing half laps or you're cutting dados. This dado set is absolutely necessary as an upgrade and not really bad for the price. It'll save you way more time than what you're actually spending on the price of these. The number two upgrade that will not break the bank is a miter gauge. Even this SawStop costs almost $4,000, comes with an embarrassingly bad miter gauge. I don't know why they cheap out on this stuff, but you can get an upgrade, which I did. I purchased this one. This is an Incra V27. This is a very good miter gauge for the price. It's a simple design. You can put a faux fence on it if you want. What I like about the Incra V27 is it fits in a standard T-slot, so it'll work on this job site saw as well as the bigger cabinet saw. But this is one of those tools that you will never regret buying, and it's less than $100. I think they're around $80 or so, depending on the day or the deal you get. This is a good upgrade to make for your miter saw. And if you got a little more money to spend, you want something a little bit nicer, a lot more features, you can check out the Harvey Compass. They sent me this a few years ago, and I just love having it. They do have an upgraded version now that has a few more features than this one, but this one has been good to me. I like it that it has the fence already on there. It has a lot of micro adjustments that you can use. It's just an overall well-made tool that I've had zero trouble out of. The third upgrade you should make to your table saw is to build you a crosscut sled. If you've never done this, this is one of the easiest builds you can do. All it takes is some plywood, a little bit of time, and some good plans. I've got some good plans on this one. This is my iteration on a crosscut sled. It has handles on the back to make it safer so that your hands are never near that blade. It's one of the things I love most about this sled. It also has a miter fence that lets you cut any angle that you so choose. Because I use the match fit system, you can use their clamps here as well to hold down the parts so you can ensure that your hands don't have to get anywhere near that blade. That's why I call this the safer crosscut sled. And stop blocks so you can cut most anything. Now what you're going to use this most for is cutting small parts or to ensure you're getting square cuts. That's one of the main things I use this thing for, especially if I want to make sure every side is completely square, because I know for a fact this is square because I built it that way. And the great thing about this sled is you can adjust it to fit any miter saw. It'll fit on a job site saw, it'll fit on one of these saws. All you'd have to do is make it a little narrower or wider depending on your saw. It's pretty easy to do. I have a whole video on how to make this. That way you get yours exactly right too. I'll link that in the card above as well as in the description. 3B is the tapering and jointing jig. These are extremely easy to make. All you need is a piece of plywood, a dovetail bit, and a router. Anybody can make these, and it's going to make your life easier. If you don't have a jointer, you can edge joint with this jig as well as taper if you're making tapered legs or any other thing you need tapered. This is one of the handiest little jigs that's very easy to make. It'll take you about 20 or 30 minutes to make it max, and it's something you'll use all the time. I have a whole video on jointing without a jointer. I'll also link down there, which includes how to build this. And the last jig is this. Kind of looks like a spaceship thing. This is a thin rip jig. It goes into any standard T-slot. What I like about this jig is it's cutting the thin pieces on the left side of the blade. In other words, you're gonna set this jig to the thickness of the thin stock you want. So if it's 1/8 inch, you'll cut that first piece 1/8 inch, then you'll move your fence over, make the second cut. That second cut's also gonna be 1/8 of an inch. Then you move your fence over. You don't wind up having such a tiny space between the blade and the fence that you can't get that cut, or not safely anyway. I like this because it's cheap and it works. Number 4 on the list is this. It's the Jessom stock guides. If you cut a lot of sheet goods or even thinner stock, this really helps hold the stock against the fence. Because of the way these things are designed, they have rollers that are kind of slightly tilted towards your fence, and it literally pulls the stock or the plywood or the wood, whatever you're cutting, toward the fence. Keeps it pressed tight against the fence so you don't have any deviation in your cuts. This is an extremely easy upgrade. Jessom makes some amazing tools. I've been extremely pleased with this. I built this jig based on a design my friend had. I have free plans for this jig. If you have a SawStop, you want to make the same kind of jig, they're on the website. It's using 2 mag switches to keep it in place. These lock it down tight. It never budges from there. And then you can adjust these stock guides anywhere you need them to make the cuts that you need. This has been one of the better upgrades I've made to my table saw. And when they're not in use, because they're in mag switch, I can mag switch them to my metal storage cabinets, and it's just up and out of the way. Or you can hang it, there's a hole here designed so that you can hang it on the wall, keep them out of the way and safe from getting damaged. The good thing about the Jessom stock guides is they can be adapted. You can make jigs to fit basically any table saw that you're using. The only downside of the Jessom stock guides is if you don't have a table saw with a fence similar to this, you'll have to come up with your own jig to fit it to your table saw. That's not hard. We're woodworkers, we build stuff. Stick around after number 5. I've got a bonus pick for you that's going to help make your cuts that much cleaner. Also, I'll give you a way to save some money off my CrossCut Sled plan or any other plans we have available. Number 5 on the list, feather boards and or push sticks. I know, it's a boring topic, but listen to me. There have been multiple people injured by the push stick that comes with their table saw. I made a video about that. There's the thumbnail, what it looks like, and I'll put it in the description below. But typically the push stick that comes with your table saw isn't that great. It's just plastic. Those can shatter and cause massive injuries to your arms, face, torso, etc. I highly recommend throwing that thing in the trash and getting a proper one or building your own out of wood. It's really not that difficult to make push sticks depending on what style you like. Obviously the micro jig gripper is one of the best that I recommend because it can basically go over the blade and still keep your hand safe so long as the blade is low enough. That's one of the things you have to watch out for. It is really great when you're cutting thin stock so that you can adjust this little foot. Still gives you quite a bit of balance there. They've recently come out with the Gripper Row 2, which is also a really nice little push stick, and it works in a few different ways, but overall I like the Gripper better. Bow Products makes some push sticks also that have a foam tip, so if it does hit the blade, it just cuts the foam and doesn't damage the plastic. Those are pretty nice as well. And then there are feather boards. Feather boards help keep your stock pushed against the fence, similar to these stock guides. So if you don't have a set of stock guides, this is the next best thing. I made a video with like 5 different jigs on how to use these in various ways to keep vertical pressure, horizontal pressure, but these bow feather boards are fantastic. And because they are made of that EVA foam, if it does get into the blade, it's not going to throw chunks of shards of plastic back at you. It's just foam. It's not going to injure you as long as you got your eye protection on. One of the great things about these bow feather boards is the fact that these inserts are replaceable. So if you do damage them, you can just buy a replacement. Because they're foam, they're not going to mar your wood, but at the same time, they give plenty of pressure against the fence to help prevent some kickback as well as keep it tight against the fence so your cuts are accurate. As far as making your own push sticks, you do whatever you do. You can come up with any design you want. There's this towel design that's pretty popular. This one works well. I've even gotten into the blade a little bit with this one, but this keeps your hands pretty good away from the blade, but I like this one as well. This is from a friend at All Red Woodworks. This is his design. Basically, this keeps your hand way up and away from the blade, especially when you're cutting the thinner wood. All right, after the bonus tip, I'm gonna give you a power tip, okay? Here's the bonus tip. Get a zero clearance insert for your table saw. I know the Delta/rigid table saws have them available, especially like on Etsy's where I bought mine. They were just MDF inserts, but that's gonna keep your cuts really clean on the bottom of the cut. And it prevents pieces from falling down in there, or if you're cutting thin stock, from getting jammed up in there. Sometimes that's happened to me. One of the great things is with a zero clearance, it's not gonna stop up your dust collection because those chunks don't fall in there either. So it just depends on your table saw model. You can usually Google or search it on Amazon or Etsy and find the inserts pre-made. SawStop makes their own that you can find on Amazon as well. You know what time it is, power tip time. The power tip is, I don't care where you're at, what your skill level is, you should buy a tourniquet for your shop. Why? Because these things will stop the bleeding and allow you to have time to get help. If you cut a major artery on your table saw or any other tool in your shop, you literally have about 90 seconds before you black out, give or take. These will save your life or someone in your shop's life. Make sure you buy a name brand and not a knockoff brand. You do not want something breaking on these when you're trying to put them on somebody. That would be catastrophic. What's the purpose of even having one? You may have to spend $5 or $10 more to get the name brand, but absolutely get one of these. Make sure you watch videos on how to apply these properly. I'll link to a good one in the description, and then practice with them on yourself. If you don't practice with them, you'll have no idea what to do when the crap hits the fan. Make sure you're applying these monthly, weekly, however you feel comfortable training with them, but train and put them on your leg, your arm, etc. These will save your life for somebody you love. These are the best table saw upgrades on a budget that you can get on Amazon. Let's go. If you like any of the tools you see today, I'll link them in the description and the pinned comment to help you find them easier. These are awesome. All right, out of the box is pretty impressive what you get here for the price, and that's what this is all about, the budget level stuff. Well packaged, I like that. It's a really nice beefy fence. So far so good. Oh, and this does have that extension on there. I like it so far. Let's hope it's accurate. I was quite impressed coming out of the box. This is a fairly heavy duty miter gauge. In other words, this is extruded aluminum, very, very straight and accurate right out of the box as you see here, and very easy to assemble. You literally just loosen 2 bolts off the back of this thing, slide the fence on, tighten that up. You're good to go. You can move that fence wherever you want it along that rail there. It does also include a stop block with micro adjustments. At this price point, this is good to see. I love it. And we also do have the extension wing that we can extend out for more support for longer cuts. It also does come with a variety of wrenches that you can use to adjust this, which you'll probably lose. Just a few Allen keys and this tiny little wrench. Very minimal adjustments are going to be needed here if it's out of the box square. And they do say that right out of the box that it should be ready to go, but there is clear instructions on how you can adjust it should you need it. The actual knob here that you use to attach to your miter gauge, don't forget to put your little plastic washer on there. It feels like a plastic core there, but the outer edges has some type of aluminum grip on there. Not overly grippy, not like a barbell or anything like that, but it does have a little bit of texture there to help you grip it. And it's actually a nice size around to grip, tighten up, loosen, however you need to do that. Now there are positive stops all along where you see those detents. You just pull this little knob up and twist it so that it's sitting on top and not down in that groove. Once you do that and you loosen this knob, you can just slide it along, flip that back down, and it snaps back into place. Pretty cool. And you can leave that raised up to get any angle along the radius, right, that you need, all the way up to 67.5. Looks like all the way to 70 to the left or to the right. So 70 degrees either way. And those positive stops are at common angles, like 15, 22.5, 30, 35, 45, 60, and 67.5. Now you'll notice set screws on the side of this, and that's where you're going to adjust the tension in your miter slot. It will fit 3/4 inch miter slots, as well as like the T miter slots that are 3/4 inch. So I know these type work like on the small 8 1/4 DeWalt job site saw, 10-inch saw, Milwaukee saws, anything like that should have that 3/4 inch groove in it or slot, so this will work. Now I did have to adjust this slightly to fit my miter slot. There was a little bit of slop in there. There are 4 set screws on there that you can adjust. I kept adjusting the one on the back. It felt like it was just a little sloppy for me, and so I just kept on until it gets fairly snug. I want it to be able to slide smooth in the slot, but I also don't want it to have any slack at all. I want it to be snug. That's what you want, so it doesn't move. Now, a couple of things to note. First, cut out of the box on 0, 90 degrees, perfectly square on a common 2x6 that you can pick up anywhere. Tried it on this piece of hardwood here, and it cut perfectly square again. Next, I tried some 45s. On the first 45, I accidentally hit my piece of plywood that's laying on my workbench, so I had to stop and then cut again. But 45 degrees is 45 degrees. It did well. I didn't do anything. I didn't check it. I just used the positive stop at 45, made the cut. Then I made another cut at 45 on the opposite end, cut the piece in two, and let's see if they fit together. You can't get much better than that. Like, it's perfectly 45, perfectly square, 90-degree corner after those two 45s coming together. And a few things I really enjoy about this is the stop block and that micro adjustment. Just like here on that first 45 cut, because I had to stop and start again, you could see where the blade was just a little bit off. So basically use the stop block, use that micro adjust so I could just take off a tiny bit. And the stop block also prevents that board from sliding down as you're making the cut, which is also a good idea. I do like that you can flip this thing up out of the way, so if you don't need the stop block, you can just rock without it. I do like this extension fence. It will extend all the way out to about 38, 37.5 inches away from my blade, or away from the end of the fence, which I have set slightly away from the blade. But that extension fence will let you cut longer stock should you need to. Sometimes you do. Here's the drawback, I think, where we're going to see this at. One thing I've noticed on this miter gauge that you probably won't see on higher end miter gauges, but again, those cost $400, $500, $550 for the SawStop, which is quite amazing. I saw it in person, but it's also $550. This one, the problem I think is going to be on the long extension here. Because we have this long extension and because it's not as high end, I'll say it's more budget friendly, you're going to give up some things on these type of miter gauges, and that's kind of to be expected. If you put pressure on the far side away from the miter slot, you're going to see, or I'd see on this one, a little bit of flex, and that could be a problem if you let the board or whatever stock you're cutting push on the outside. If you're holding everything right here in the center, pushing through the cut, you'll probably be okay. But if you let anything drag out here, or if you're pushing from the outside or anything like that, it's going to cause some inaccuracies just because there's a very, very minor amount of play. Now, I've tried to get this play out with adjusting the set screws to make them very tight, tightening down the knob. Nothing seems to work, tightening every knob and bolt on here that I can. It's just going to have that play simply because of how it's designed, in my opinion. But it's not a deal killer if you know that that's going to happen and you keep all of your pressure right here in the center. It should be okay for most things. Now, the longer pieces, I think you're going to see a little bit of trouble there, but I don't think you're going to see it on shorter pieces, making 90-degree cuts, as long as you can keep everything pressurized right here at the slot. Now, it does have a measurement scale on top that's both in inches and millimeters. Should you be into the metric system, we are not here in the US, and we're okay with that. But it does have both no matter which system that you run. I think it's a good thing, but I just don't trust it. You would have to basically calibrate it every time to your miter slot or to your blade, or maybe 1 inch away, or however you're going to, ½ inch away, whatever you're going to do away from the blade. Then you would have to calculate that out, or just keep an eye on that. I think it's going to cause more trouble, more confusion than anything. It's just a rough guide. They also give you this little flip indicator that you can use to indicate where it's at on the scale. Should you want to use that, it's there as an option. I'm glad they put it on there as an option. I think the best part about this is this micro adjustment. You can just fine tune this as much as you need. You're just going to loosen off one side, leave this side locked down, and then you can micro adjust that anywhere you want. Like you can really dial in your cuts if you want to use that stop block there to make precise, accurate cuts. I do love the fact that they put just a regular twist lever so that I could use the extension fence and lock it down. One of my gripes about the Incra 1000 HD, I think is what it was, is it had to use a wrench basically, or a screwdriver wrench to loosen those off and adjust it. I didn't care for that, but I do like that this is on there so that I don't have to have any special wrenches or anything to adjust that fence. Overall, for the price, and if you don't want to get the one with the extension fence, you can save even more money. I'll link to both in the description. Both of these Vevor brand. I think for the price, this is going to be hard to beat for a budget level miter gauge that's accurate should you use it correctly. No matter what angle you're cutting, if you're trying to do repeatable things, this will help you on your miter saw, especially if you're a beginner or on a budget. And if you're looking for one that's better than the one that comes with almost all table saws, this is a good option for you, in my opinion. It's not perfect, as noted, but I think it's a good option for you if you're needing one. The next budget table saw upgrade that you should consider from Amazon is the Mousecraft Grabber Pro. Now, it may look similar to one that you may already know. I love the micro jig gripper. I've used one for years. And recently at a trade show, I talked to some Mousecraft guys and they said, hey, have you tried the Grabber Pro? And I said, no. And they said, let us send you one. Check it out, see what you think. Listen, y'all, out of the box, there's no setup to be done. Now on the gripper, you usually have to assemble it. Not a big deal, but it's just one of the extra steps. This one, all you literally have to do is flip around this little foot that drops down and you're good to go. Now this one has a few things going for it that the gripper does not. First, I think the pad on the bottom, which a lot of people have told me that the gripper doesn't grip as well as they would like it to on their products. I've never had that issue, but some people do. This is much more grippy. It is noticeably more grippy on the bottom, and two of the legs underneath do adjust side to side where the gripper only does one. What's cool about this, it comes with basically 4 different legs or feet or whatever you want to call them. They call them legs. These long pieces on the bottom. So we have a 1/2 inch and a 1 inch that will move, and then there's a stationary leg on the left side. And you get both a 1/4 inch and they include an 1/8 inch leg that you can easily swap out with 2 screws. Where that's going to shine is if you're cutting very thin strips. And I like the fact that we do have that option there to swap that out, and it's easy. Another thing that's included with this is also this drop down leg on the back, or a pusher block, or whatever you want to call it. I love these at a jointer or even a bandsaw because you'll be able to grab the back of that board and push it through the cut. It can also be useful on the table saw, obviously, but I do like this style. The feet that grip on the bottom or the back. It's very much like older push sticks that you see, like this one, that has the cleat on the back to grab the edge of the board and push it through. Also, the handle is tilted or angled on the micro jig. It's a little bit more ergonomic, honestly, and it's going to help when you're going over the blade. You're usually standing left of the blade anyway, and it's tilted to this way. I do like that. You're also getting a longer footprint here. This is quite a bit longer than the gripper, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's going to give you more control on the piece that you're cutting. So I think they've done a good job here doing something similar to the gripper, but making it a grabber. The gripper, the grabber, whichever one you want to check out. But I will say this one is quite a bit lower in price than the gripper at normal price. So if you want to check out one that you're trying to save money on, which is the purpose of this video, is to show you some budget options to upgrade your table saw to make you safer, this might be a good option for you. I'll link it in the description and pinned comment. There are a few features here that I do like better than the gripper, and I love the gripper. This cleat on the back is probably one of my favorite features, and I even let it kind of sacrificial into the blade on purpose so that I could push that thin strip all the way through. And I like the fact that I can do that. And I'm pretty sure I can order a replacement for that. If I can, I'll pop up yes here on the screen. I'm almost certain you can. And so if you use these for like thin strips a lot, then that might be useful for you. I also like the fact that I can move all of the legs to one side and get them out of the way. So if I am using something like a thin rip jig, then I don't have to worry about it getting caught up. And just the benefits of dropping this leg down on the side to give you more stability depending on the thickness of what material you're cutting, whether that's a 2x, 1x, whatever, it adjusts that, it just gives you a lot of stability. And the handle on here, I do like quite a bit better than the gripper handle. It's just more conformed to the fingers, there's grooves there, it's a little softer, and I like the fact that it's angled. It really does make a big difference because I always stand to the left of the blade, push the cut through. I like that. I think they thought this out. When I first saw this, to be perfectly honest, one of the reasons I haven't used one or got one for the channel, I thought, man, this is just a dupe, a knockoff, but it's different. It's similar, but different enough. I think it's justifiable here. What do you think? And speaking of that thin rip jig that I just mentioned, but this is another great budget option to upgrade a table saw. It fits in a standard miter slot. When you tighten that knob down, it locks it into place. There is a wheel right on the front of it that allows you to move the stock over between the fence and this, and it bumps that wheel, lock your fence down. That wheel moves, so you can push your thin cuts through, and you can repeat the process over and over. I've done this a bunch of times using this jig to make things like trim from a router station or a miter station, just little thin strips, just adds a little character to it, and I use this to do it with. I think it's one of the best upgrades you can make, and it's only about $30 or $35 on Amazon, so it's a good little buy. This one's from Peachtree Woodworking on Amazon, so it's a really good top quality brand, well-known brand, and it works well. And it's worked well for a long time. I've had this one for a few years. The next budget upgrade I think you should make is the DFM height gauge. This thing's less than $30, goes in 1/8 inch increments, made out of solid aluminum, and it's durable. I've had this for a couple of years now. It's great because it goes all the way from 1/8 inch all the way to 2 inches, pretty much the most common size you're gonna need to raise your blade up, and you can do it quickly and accurately, which is what I love about this. It's easy to use, very cheap, and very handy. It's even handy as a shirt pocket. This is also a great upgrade for your table saw if you work in a humid environment or damp environments, or your stuff's always rusting, or you don't want it to rust, or maybe you want your wood to slide on your table saw slick as Al's knot. This will do it. This is BoShield T9 rust and corrosion prevention for metal, and this is a really good product, and it's less than $30, around $20 actually, and this lasts a very long time. It's in an aerosol can like WD-40 or something similar to that, in that type can, not that type product. Now I've shown this on the channel way back, like 3, 4, 5 years ago now, and this is a very good product. I used it before I started using carbon method, which I love and think it's an amazing product. It's also quite expensive, but I think it's worth it. But if you're looking for a budget option to prevent rust and to make your wood slide on the tabletop real slickety-like, this is a good option for you. T9 BoShield, developed by the Boeing company because they need a special lubricant like this. So they developed this, and now it's on the market. It's been on the market for a while. It even says on the bag that it's made for saw tabletops, and of course a bunch of other stuff you can use it for. But I've used this on the jointer, the planer bed, just to make it more slick, and the table saw. I used it on my Delta table saw for a few years, or a couple of years, and it worked well. Prevented the rust, and it kept it slick. You just have to reapply it about once a month or so, but this stuff lasts a long time. If you're in the buy once crowd, get the carbon method. Otherwise, check out this BoShield T9. Both are linked in the description and the pinned comment. This is the single greatest table saw upgrade that I have ever found. It literally changes how you use your table saw forever. It's that good. And it's about to get better. If you'd like to check out this bow extender fence or any of the accessories that I showed today, I'm going to link them in the description and the pinned comment to help you find them easier. Let me show you what this thing does. If you follow the channel, you may know that I reviewed this bow extender fence last year, and I think was one of the best tool upgrades that you could make. I love the fact that this clamps to basically any fence. It doesn't matter if it's a contractor saw, a job site saw like this one, or even a cabinet saw. And adding the stock accessories to it, like the in-feed and out-feed support, as well as those vertical feather bores, just takes it to the next level. This adds a ton of functionality, especially to these smaller saws, because now you can cut safer and more accurate just with this single add-on. But like any tool, there's always a little room for improvement. I've got 3 simple and cheap accessories that we're gonna be able to make for this that takes this small job site saw and gives it cabinet saw capabilities. And I've got free plans for all of this linked in the description, so check this out. Now all of these accessories are using the bow knobs and those T-bolts. I'll link to those as well so you can find them. If you're new or don't know much about the bow fence, before we get to the accessories, let me show you everything this thing can do, because it is next level when we talk about how to upgrade a table saw, especially these smaller saws. So basically what happens is this bow extender fence is an extruded aluminum fence, and the way they've designed it, it will clamp to any fence pretty much. Just like this job site style saw, or even my SawStop style fence, it will clamp to that and adds a lot of functionality. First, you can add vertical feather boards. That gives you that vertical pressure down, and it just keeps things from moving on you, especially when you're cutting longer stocks. And then when you pair that with the bow feather boards themselves on the horizontal plane, it keeps everything pushed against that fence and down toward the table, and everything comes out perfect when you're cutting. That's what I love about this system. And you can also add these in-feed and out-feed supports, and that's where things start leveling up. Because now you've got enough support, especially on these smaller style tables, where you just don't have enough room. On a cabinet saw, yeah, you've got extra room for the outfeed, you got some extra room for the infeed, but on these job site style saws, it's just so small, you don't have a lot of room. And these infeed and outfeed supports really help when you're cutting longer stock, but they could be improved. Now these infeed and outfeed supports are absolutely a must-have for this fence in my opinion, because you're gonna use them a ton. But if you're cutting wider boards, this is where things start getting a little hairy, because basically you've gone back to your cut piece is supported, so it's not gonna fall, but the off-cut piece is where things start falling. For one, it damages your wood, and it can get dangerous if you try to reach and grab and stop it from falling or anything like that. So this is where I think we can improve this a great deal. Now when you start cutting wider boards, say wider than a 2x4, maybe a 1x6, or sheet goods that aren't too wide, or even thicker boards like 2x12s and things like that, you need some extra support. And that's where this little jewel comes in. Basically what this does is it extends your outfeed support to give you more support for that off-cut piece on these wider boards. All of these are very, very simple to make. And again, all three have free plans available, so you can make these in no time. Basically, you're just gonna slip this on where the current outfeed support is. It is tapered on the front side just to help in case the board sags a little bit out there or whatever, it'll still catch and go up on there, and it gives you that support. As you can see here, cutting the MDF, it helped hold it up. Literally, you don't have to worry about anything falling now. And when I cut this 2x12, which is where things start getting a little interesting, because if you cut a 2x12 without this extra support, it's just gonna fall. It could fall off and hit your saw and knock your saw over if it's a big enough board. So this is where this really helps, because now we have 12 inches of extended support to help us with those wider boards or wider sheet goods that aren't too wide yet. But what about cutting very long boards like this 10-foot 2x4 you see here? That's where this comes into play, and this is just an extended support. In other words, it gives you an extension table on your table saw. Now what's great about this is, again, very simple to make, and again, free plans on how to make this. It's dead simple. You're not gonna have any issues making this. It does also include a little bevel here on the end just to help catch that board if there's any reason it sags a little bit after it comes off the saw. Now attaching this to the fence is extremely easy. It works just like the in-feed and out-feed supports that attach already. You have the T-bolts, they slide right in, you tighten those knobs up, it's there. You don't have to worry about it. And now you can rip down longer boards. Like this 10-foot 2x4, I was able to rip the edge off of it. It kept supported all the way through the cut. I don't have to worry about it falling. I don't have to worry about it coming unbalanced and causing a kickback or anything like that. So if you're cutting a lot of longer boards like 1x4s, 2x4s, things like that, this is where this attachment's really gonna shine. Before adding this on, what happens is when you cut a longer board like this 10-foot 2x4, it acts very similar to that wider board that we talked about earlier, where once you get a certain amount into the cut, the weight of the board on the back side starts pulling or pushing up on your push stick. It also can come up off the table. It can cause a kickback. It can also cause inaccurate cuts because things start moving and hopping around up there, and that's not what you want. And that's where this really does shine, because it gives it that support. Now one thing you may notice is on a longer board, especially on a thicker board that's going to be a little bit heavier, you may need to support this longer piece, because you can see even on this one, a 2x4, it's bouncing a little bit. Didn't bother the cut at all. But when you start getting thicker boards that are going to be heavier, and the plans actually include this, you'll want to put an extendable leg on there, or a fold down leg, just like the next jig is going to have. And so it's very, very simple to do. You can add that to this 30-inch extension, and it's really going to make it more stable, and I would actually recommend it. Again, it's in the plans anyway. Just go ahead and put those on there. Last but certainly not least, probably the belle of the ball, the gem that really transitions this into basically a full workshop. So think outfeed table support on a job site saw. Because it has this leg that extends down, it's going to allow you to cut giant sheets of plywood like this 4x8 sheet of plywood by yourself on a smaller saw. And that's where this really shines, because if you've ever tried to cut a full sheet of plywood by yourself on a small saw, you know what a pain in the rear that is, and how difficult it is to get good, accurate cuts, because it's very difficult to hold that thing up there especially when you start making the cut on the off-feed side. What winds up happening is the weight transfer goes to the back of the saw, and then it starts popping up on the front of the saw, and after the cut, it just falls to the ground. It's unsafe, and it's just not a fun thing to do by yourself. What's great about this attachment is it attaches to your bow extender fence, and you can move it left and right depending on how much support you need, on which side of the blade you need it. This attachment's 44 total inches wide. It does also have that beveled edge to help catch that plywood as it ramps up on there, should it be sagging, especially like 1/4 inch. Thinner plywood tends to sag a little bit after the cut. It's just nature of the beast, but it's also extremely easy to make this and cheap. When you install this and you start cutting your sheet goods, even thicker plywoods like this 3/4 inch plywood, you can manage it easier because once you get the cut all the way through and that weight does transfer, you've got a lot of support here on the back, especially because you have this extended leg there. It's going to really support that weight. You're not going to have to worry about that. It just makes things safer, again, more accurate and easier on you. And when you get to cutting larger sheets like this big 4x8 sheet of 1/4 inch plywood, you can see that it's much easier to manage with this accessory. So everything is supported all the way through the cut, and it makes it much, much easier to control and do by yourself. I know a lot of us are working in shops by ourselves or on job sites by ourselves. This is just giving yourself an extra hand, especially when you start cutting those sheet goods. What's great about this accessory, just like those other three, is it's easy on, it's easy off, and then this one has quite a bit of adjustment so you can adjust it to be basically whatever size you need to help catch those offcuts. If you don't have a bow extender fence yet, seriously consider it. I'm telling you, it levels up your table saw like no other upgrade that I've seen on the market to date. And when you pair that with the wider feed support, the longer feed support, and the sheet good support, you turn this little job site or compact table saw into a complete workstation that you can manage these larger pieces by yourself. And it makes it safer and more accurate with the cutting. What's amazing is all of these can be built in just a few minutes each. They can be installed on and off in seconds, and it transforms your compact or job site saws into a complete workstation that you can be cutting these larger pieces by yourself. It makes everything more stable, makes things safer, especially with those wider and longer pieces that can be a challenge to do by yourself. Now this bow extender fence comes in 3 sizes, 24, 36, and 46. I personally think 46 is the sweet spot, especially for these type saws and these accessories. That's the one I'm going to recommend. All of these fences will clamp to the bandsaw fence as well, so it really one fence will transform multiple tools. So go check them out. I think you'll really appreciate having these. Link in the description and the pinned comment to help you find all of this easier. Now one thing you should know, I think you should know, is all 3 of these jigs come from the mind of Mike Taylor, who owns TayTools.com. You have no idea how much he's given to the woodworking community, absolutely free, like this brilliant idea, as well as probably hundreds more that are on dozens of channels across YouTube. And so support him if you can. Mike Taylor, thank you so much for sharing this idea with us and just literally changing woodworking for the better, always. Thank you. These are the must-have jigs every woodworker should have in their shop, in my opinion. Some of these are so stupid simple. 2 pieces of plywood, a couple holes. Let's go. First on the list has to be the CrossCut Sled. The most accurate jig for my shop cutting 90-degree cuts is this CrossCut Sled. I use it all the time. This is a very simple jig to make. This is my iteration, has handles on it. It's called a safer CrossCut Sled. First thing you're going to do is cut 2 3.5 inch pieces and glue those together. This is 3/4 inch plywood that you're using. Make sure it's flat, straight plywood. A decent grade of plywood is recommended here. But you can find those at your local home store. It's usually called sanded birch or something like that. Now once you get those 2 pieces glued up, you're going to leave those to the side and you're going to work on the base. The base is literally whatever size tabletop you have on your table saw. So for me, I made mine to fit the SawStop, but you can make these for the job site saws as well. Just depends on your tabletop size. Just make it close to that tabletop size. It should be good to go. From there, you're just going to cut out a couple of strips that fit in the T-slots of your table saw. So most of them are about 3/4 inches wide, but you want to make sure those fit. It's best to use hardwood here or the UHMW plastic that you can buy online as well. I use hardwood for mine. All you have to do is set those in your table saw slots, put a little CA glue or fast drying glue, and then set your plywood on top of it. That's going to match or marry those two together. And from there you can pre-drill and screw those runners into the base to secure it. Just make sure you don't use screws that are too long so it doesn't break the top. Once you have those attached, you're just going to cut a slot, raise the blade up through there and cut a slot in this plywood. Now don't rip all the way to each end or you just cut 2 pieces of plywood in half and you don't have a sled. You just got 2 pieces of plywood. Before I attached the fence, I took a chamfer bit and I went ahead and put a small chamfer on the bottom. That way, on the bottom inside, that way that you don't get any wood dust or chips that clog up the area. From there, I just use a framing square to kind of get this close. We're fixing to square this up using the 5-cut method, but to get it close, that's really all you need to do. Just get it close. On the right side, I went ahead and put a screw in to attach this permanently, but on the left side, I'm just using a quick clamp to hold it in place. Once you get it pretty close using the clamp, I just went ahead and attached that with the screw. Now on my system, after I had the fence done and the slot cut, I went ahead and removed this fence before I got it perfectly square, and I cut these dovetail slots in there. What that's going to do is let me use these dovetail clamps. That way I will be able to hold small parts as well as have a miter fence that I can add to this sled using the dovetail hardware. You want to put these dovetail grooves in before you attach the fence so that you can get them to the right spot. That's why it's important to mark where the fence was before you take it off. On this sled, I added the mounts for the handles, and then I cut off any excess from the back that I didn't think was necessary. It's going to reduce the weight and it's just going to make it a little more usable. Then I went ahead and attached this back fence. That's going to give it a place to hold the 2 pieces together when you cut the thing in half. Now what's holding this together is the back fence and the fence closest to you. That way you don't just have 2 pieces of plywood flopping around. Now I'm going to use the 5-cut method to get this fence as square as humanly possible in my workshop anyway. All you do here is you're taking a piece of scrap wood that's 10 or 12 inches square-ish, and then you're just going to start making cuts, and you're going to rotate it a 1/4 turn every cut for 4 cuts. On the 5th cut, when you rotated that 1/4 turn, you're going to basically cut a slice off of this piece of wood. You'll measure both ends and see how far out of square you are. And there's a 5-cut method calculator that I'll drop in the description that tells you your tolerance and which way you need to move things. In this instance, mine was 0.02 inches out, so I used a feeler gauge to move this 0.02, and that dialed it right in. Do the 5-cut method again just to double check things. And once it's as close as you think you'll ever need it, it's good.
It's good.
Once I got this one dialed in, it was 0.007 of an inch square. That's close enough for me. From there, I'm just going to use screws on the bottom side to lock this in place to ensure that it never moves. Now all that's left to complete this was to mount the handles as well as put in the T-track on top of the fence. Standard T-track, standard 3/4 inch wide slot. This gives me a place to use a stop block. Now once this is built, I literally never have to build it again. Like it's just, I've had this for well over a year, maybe a couple years, and it's just an essential part of the wood shop that I think every woodworker should have in their shop. Link below to the full build video if you want to build one for yourself, as well as plans available for this project. Next on the list, I think every wood shop should have, especially if you don't have a jointer or if you're building tapered legs, is this. It's just a small piece of plywood. This is one of the simplest jigs you're going to build. Again, I'm using the match fit system because it works so well, and because I use it on my CrossCut sled, I can use it on this, and it just makes everything much easier and more cost effective to keep using the same system.
This isn't?
Again, this is 3/4 inch plywood. You can literally build all of these jigs out of the same sheet of plywood. Cut this about 3, 4, 5 foot long, whatever you want. This one's 3 foot long. This works well for my table saw. All you do is take your dovetail bit and route down this length of this about 2 inches from the end. And then from there, you'll just divide out 5 of these dovetail grooves to go across the grain. This allows you to joint the edges of boards and cut tapers if you need to do that. And it's using the match fit system, so everything's nice and secure in there. You want to be careful and not let the clamp stick out the edge of this because of the way it rides close to that blade. You don't want to hit the blade with one of those clamps. It'll damage your blade. But under normal circumstances, just using it as a jointer, which most people will do, just edge jointing boards, this works awesome. I didn't put a runner on the bottom of mine to run down the slot. I just let it ride against the riving knife basically every time. I've never had any issues with that. You can do the same thing, or if you want it to run on that runner, you can do it just like we did the CrossCut sled and install a runner on the bottom to run in your T-slot. The next jig I think you should make, especially if you have a miter saw and you cut small parts, is a miter saw sled. It's not even really a sled, it's more of a faux table to set on top of your miter saw. What this does is give you 0 clearance in the back as well as the front, so you can cut those small parts safer and cleaner because it's 0 clearance. You're getting less tear out there. All you have to do is measure the width and the depth at 90 degrees and then cut a piece of plywood and or MDF, depending on what you want to use. You can use the same plywood we're using for the other jigs and cut that to size. From there, I cut 2 small strips and glued them under the backside touching the miter saw on each side, and that's going to hold that in place left and right. From there, I cut a fence that's about 3 inches tall and just CA glued that to the back to temporarily stick it in place. Next, you want to set the depth setting so that it does not cut all the way through your jig, because you don't want to cut, again, if you cut this in half, then you just have two pieces sitting side by side. So I set my depth setting to cut about an 1/8 inch deep and just made that cut. Now you can do 45s as well if you do a lot of 45 cuts, but if you just do 90-degree cuts for small parts, then I wouldn't even cut the 45s. What that's going to do is give you a zero clearance, and it gives you an exact spot where that blade is cutting every single time, so it's much easier to line up your cuts and you'll get the same repetitive cut every time, making things more accurate. And for small parts, this is where this is specifically needed, because if you're trying to cut small parts on a miter saw, if you've ever tried to, you know that the fences don't come close enough together, so when you try to cut that small part, it has a tendency to try to roll back with the blade. I've done this and it scared me. I literally broke my thumb doing it because of the kickback. It's just dangerous and unnecessary when you can build something so simple in about 5 or 10 minutes. This just keeps everything nice and safe. And then if you pair that with a $1 million stick to hold those things down, this is a great way to cut those small parts. Not a lot of people have a hand saw to be able to cut these accurately square and to length every time, so this is one of the better methods I've found. Of course, you could also do this on the CrossCut Sled, cutting very small parts. But if you're using the miter saw a lot, this would be a handy jig for you. Before we get to this handy little jewel, let me tell you about the planer sled. Now, if you have a planer and you have a board that's twisted, this is the best way I found to get the twist out of that board. Again, very simple. 3/4 inch piece of plywood as wide as your planer is. So in this instance, mine's 13 inches wide. I've got a board that's about 12 inches or so wide. Doesn't have to be exact, just close. And then you're just gonna glue and screw a little strip on one end to keep that from, basically keep the planer from pulling the board off of your sled. The only thing you need to make sure here is that that plywood is nice and straight and flat. Once you have that done, all you have to do is put your board on there, shim it up so that it's not rocking. Once you have it shimmed, you're just gonna run that through the planer. Make sure you run the cleat side, in other words, the board you put on the end first, because that planer is wanting to pull that board that way. Then just run it through until you have the same surface all the way across. This is gonna flatten that one side. From there, you're just gonna flip the board over, start running that through until the other side is parallel to the bottom side. You got two parallel sides, and you've removed the twist from that board with a very, very simple jig that anyone can make. I'll show you this jig, but I got one bonus for you if you stick around. Now, this is for the router table. This is one of the safest, best ways I've ever found to cut across the grain or cut slots or anything like that in your wood. This jig idea was given to me from my friend Mike at TateTools.com. I highly recommend you check him out. You're gonna take a piece of plywood and cut it 10 inches square. This is 10 inches by 10 inches. Then you just need a piece of plywood that's 2.5 inches tall, 11 inches long. I drilled two 1.5 inch holes in each corner. That's the jig. Now, if you're using the router table and you're trying to cut basically a narrow piece, cut a groove across that. In this instance, I was trying to cut a dovetail groove across the grain or across the width of the board. This board's only about 3 or 4 inches wide. If you tried to do that without this jig, there's no support for it, so there's no way to hold that perfectly square. Now with this jig, you're gonna put it up against the fence of your router table, set that distance that you're gonna want to cut that groove away from the end, and then this gives that support. It's gonna do two things. One, it's gonna keep it from rocking, and two, it's gonna keep it from tearing out when you finish that cut. Because if you don't have anything back there supporting it, a lot of times you'll get blowout or tear out there. This is one of the simplest jigs to make your router table much, much safer. Now there's a thin rip jig for the table saw that I've recommended multiple times. This is one of the handiest jigs you can have, especially if you're cutting very thin strips. And where this comes in handy for me is if I'm putting trim on, say, like my miter station or even this workbench, and I need to cut thin strips to go around certain things. This is really, really handy to have. It cuts very accurate, it's very easy to use, and it's not very expensive. All right, so out of the box, we get a very nice base for this CrossCut Sled. This is kind of impressive to me. I like it. It has a nice finished feel on the top. That's a really nice, durable finish. And we get a miter gauge that goes from 0 all the way to 50 degrees. And we're going to assemble this, but it also includes a fence and some other niceties that you would have to add onto a regular CrossCut Sled. It would take you a little bit of time to do that if you were putting on a miter gauge and all that. First thing we're going to do is flip this thing over, and it comes with some self-adhesive anti-wear strips, I think that's what they call them, or wear resistant strips for the bottom of this. Should help it glide much, much smoother on the table saw while keeping it still accurate and flat. These are very easy to put on. You literally just peel the backing off and stick them on. Comes with 4. I'm gonna put 3 on because that's what the instructions tell me to do. And we always read instructions, right? This comes with an aluminum miter bar, and what that's going to do, you attach it to the bottom of this sled, and then you can adjust it with these 8 nylon screws that go all the way down the length of this bar. When you put those in, I would go ahead and put them all the way in so that neither side is sticking out, and then take it over to your miter saw slot before you put it on the sled and adjust it so that there's no wiggle in there. And that's gonna allow you to really dial this in so that it slides correctly and so that it isn't too tight. So you can really dial this in. I like that they did that. And it does include a screwdriver that fits these perfectly. Now these will thread all the way through and through. So what I did was I drove them all the way in, and then when I set this on there, I want to make sure that it's not too tight, but it can move freely. So it's a little snug there, and we can loosen or tighten it in depending on how loose or tight we want that in the slot. Then from the top side, we're going to put those 3 screws in there. Just snug those up. I wouldn't worry about over tightening. This is MDF and aluminum. It doesn't need to be that tight. Just snug. Put those 3 in, and they're countersunk, so you don't have to worry about them sticking up and getting them in the way. Now we're going to install the fence on this thing, and it was super easy. All you got to do is first put on the faux fence face. It's the MDF face so that you can replace that if you needed to. You shouldn't get into it, but sometimes you may have it extended too far and cut into it. Super easy, 3 bolts, put that on, and then there's 3 thumb screws on the back. So you can literally loosen those off and then adjust that fence if you needed to. So if you're making angle cuts, things like that, you can extend that out further if you need a little extra support behind your cut piece. Then from there, you're just going to put the fence on this sled. Now it comes with a nice bushing that's going to fit over this little stub that sticks up. And then there's a nice plastic knob that tightens that down. And on the other side of the miter fence, you're going to put this T-bolt in underneath. You want to make sure that it is turned and so that it slips up into that groove, so that it's not protruding below the surface of the sled. Protruding is a big word for a redneck. So you put that on there, you can snug that up, and then that'll allow you to tighten it at any degree from 0 all the way to 50 and lock it in place. And to finish this off, it does come with its own stop block, which is awesome. It's super easy. It runs in that T-track there. Fun fact, I actually have this same stop block on my Safer CrossCut sled that I made. It's made by Powertec. It's the exact same one. Works well. Now this will work on a job site saw like on this DeWalt if you have some type of support to the left of the blade, because those tabletops are smaller. It does have a tendency to tip to the left, as you see. It does fit in the groove though. So if you have your job site saw mounted in some type of table, or you've built an extension to the left of that blade, this will work for you. If not, you're gonna have to hold it down to make it work. But on full-size table saws, it is a dream. It fits perfect, perfect. Now the first time you use it, you're going to have to cut it to fit your saw. And so it's meant to do that. Now this is custom fit to my saw. Just cut off a small piece. Make sure that you've dialed it in on the miter slot before you make that cut. I made sure to dial it in so that it's sliding smoothly, but there's no play. And you're doing that with those 8 nylon screws you put in. Really, you don't need all 8. You just need the front and the back, and maybe one in the middle. All right, after you made that first cut, now it's time to square the fence up or adjust the fence, make those adjustments so that we know that it's square when we have it on 0. Because it may be a little bit off. Just take a square that you trust, whichever one you've got, and put it against the blade. Just make sure that your square isn't touching none of the teeth on the blade, because that will throw it off. And then from there, you're just going to square up your fence. Now you'll look at your indicator, and it's likely going to be off, or mine was. Yours may luck out and be on, but it's super easy to adjust. Literally just loosen 2 screws, adjust that window, and then tighten that back down after you've got it square. Now we know that 0 is 0, and every time I set it on 0, this is going to be a square cut, so I don't have to fool with that anymore. But it is a good idea to check it periodically, just in case something got bumped off. Once we get it dialed in, now it's time to make some cuts and see if this thing's worth the price. Now first thing I did was make, of course, a 90-degree cut. Made a couple of those on a common 2x4. I was very impressed. Everything's nice and square because we set it up to be square. One thing to note on the fence, there's a set screw there that you can adjust so that when you bump it out all the way back to 0, it'll stop on 0 if that's where you want it to stop. That's where I've got mine set. I did make 2 6-inch cuts, and one thing I like about CrossCut sleds, you can get precise cuts every time. I literally measured off of this stop block to the edge of the CrossCut sled. That's where the 6 inches is going to be. So I measured that, set my stop block up, and made 2 cuts. Stacked those 2 boards side by side. They were absolutely perfect, exactly the same. 6 inches, 6 inches. So if I'm building something, I need exact parts. This is where the CrossCut Sled shines. Say that 3 times fast. Next thing I did was set it on 45. I didn't use a square to set this up. I literally just went off the measurement or the gauge on this to see if it was accurate. Dead on. 45 degrees on that first cut. You just line the mark up. Now, you do want to make sure that it's on 90 when you first set it up. Then all the other angles should be dead on. When you do set the 45 degree, do not forget to move your fence back, because if you're at 90 degrees, the fence will actually stick further out. If you want to get it as close to the edge as possible, it's advisable just because it gives you a little bit more support out there close to the end of the cut. But when you do turn it to the 45, this will stick past the sled, so you want to make sure to move it back. If you cut it, it's not a huge deal, but it'll be kind of a bummer because you've messed up your new fence. Now you can probably get a replacement or just make your own. Looks like 1/2 inch MDF. It does have a laminate top or face to it, and the back side's laminated, and the top of the sled is laminated. Everything slides nice and smooth. And so if you do cut the fence, you'll not have that, but I'm sure you can get a replacement from Powertec pretty easy on Amazon, so I'll link to it in the description. May want to just pick one up with this just in case. A few things to point out about this sled that I really, really like. I like that they put big numbers on this miter gauge because I ain't getting no younger. I really like that. They're about as big as your grandpa's remote control with the giant buttons. You've seen those? You know what I'm talking about. That's what they kind of remind me of. They're extra big, but that's a good thing because literally at a glance you can see where you're at. Dial that in really nicely. I do like the stop block. I like it a lot. I actually have this one here. Like I said before, it goes on this CrossCut sled, rides in a regular T-Track, and they're exactly the same. I've been using this one for quite a while, and I've been very pleased with it. Works well. I like this design. Another thing to point out is the fence is square to the sled, not just toward the blade, but also vertically. It's square. I checked it with my woodpecker square, perfectly square all the way down the length of this, so that's a positive. One huge benefit of this Powertec sled is the fence. It's an extruded aluminum fence and it's perfectly square. Even when you slide the faux fence in front or the sacrificial fence in front, it still remains square. And it does have the T-Track on the top as well as the front, so if you wanted to add some type of accessory or any other type stop blocks, it should work with this if it works with standard T-Tracks. I like that this is a nice solid aluminum fence. Included with this CrossCut sled is a very handy clamp. It's just a standard T-Track clamp, well made, slides right in there, super easy to get in and out of there. And especially when you're cutting those small parts like you see here, I don't want my hand that close to the blade, just cutting a 6-inch part. So this clamp was very, very appreciated on being included with this kit. I think for the price, I don't know where you could go wrong with this. Especially if you're just starting out or if you just need a basic CrossCut sled, get those perfect 90-degree angles, maybe cut multiple pieces using the stop block, same distance accurately. This is a very, very good choice. I also like the footprint of this sled. It is a much, much smaller footprint than, say, my safer CrossCut sled. I do love my CrossCut sled. I've used it a ton. I highly recommend it if you have the space for it. But if you're in a small shop, this might be a better option for you, or if you're just intimidated on making a CrossCut sled. When I first started in woodworking, as stated earlier in the video, my very first CrossCut sled was a hot mess. It wasn't square, and I wound up throwing it away because I just kept screwing it up. These aren't the easiest things to build and get them exactly right. And if you could just purchase something like this, especially at this price point, not taking up a lot of space and doing a very good job. Very good job. I highly recommend this thing. Check it out. Link in the description and a pinned comment. Now, when I first ordered this Powertec sled, I thought that the 1 miter slot bar would be an issue because on my CrossCut sled, I have 2. It's running on both of those tracks. This is only running on 1. 0 issue. Everything remains square every single cut. Because this is only cutting on the left side of the blade, there's really no reason to have a bar on the right because it would have to go through the center of this CrossCut sled like a traditional one like we built here. So there's really no reason for it. So I don't even know why I was concerned. It works perfect, stays perfectly square, works well. If I had to give some drawbacks to the Powertec sled, one thing would be the way that they adjust or fine-tune this miter slot bar with those nylon screws that go in there. It's a little time-consuming to get it dialed in just right. It doesn't take much. If you turn it a 1/4 turn, it's too much. If you turn it 1/8 of a turn, maybe not quite there yet, so you have to kind of find that balance to get it perfectly dialed in. Not a huge deal. It's just one of those things that just to be aware of, it'll take you a few minutes to get it dialed in. As far as setup goes, if you read slow, like me, it may take you 5 minutes to get this thing set up out of the box. It's really, really fast to set up. Like, there's not a lot to it. It's pretty easy to set up. It'll take a little more time than that dialing in on your saw as far as the miter slot as well as getting everything squared up. But as far as assembly goes, super fast. Oh, and the instructions are actually well written too. Now, if you decide to build your CrossCut sled for your table saw, what will be involved and about how much will it cost? Well, you're going to need about a 1/4 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood. whatever that costs you. Now, I bought a decent grade of plywood from the home store. It doesn't have to be Baltic birch, which is like cabinet grade, but it is the sanded version of birch, which is a decent grade of plywood. On this sled, I made it about 3 foot wide by about 2 foot deep, give or take. And I'm using the match fit dovetail system. So 2 of these clamps are going to cost you about 40 bucks. And then you're also going to buy a couple of accessories so that you can make your own miter fence, similar to what you saw on the Powertec. Now I'm routing dovetail grooves in there so those clamps can be in there, and that's going to allow me to clamp down small parts. I also built this fence and put a piece of T-track in it and added the exact same stop block, coincidentally, that this other sled has. If you decide to build your table saw sled, you can use the 5-cut method, which I showed in the build video of this CrossCut sled, to really dial this in. I'll show on screen how accurate it is, but it's just silly accurate down to the thousandths of an inch that you'll never need in woodworking. Most of us anyway. I also like that I did put a blade guard on the back of mine, which this Powertec doesn't have, just simply because of the design. But I do like having the blade guard there just in case you forget that there's a blade coming through. You never know. We can get complacent. So why would you buy a CrossCut sled versus building a CrossCut sled? Well, it just depends. Like we said, space savings. This is much smaller. As you can see here, it takes up a third less space, maybe a little more than, say, the one that you build for your table saw. And also the convenience of having that scale on there so that you can easily set up those angles. And honestly, the frustration or the time involved in making one, you might want to just save that and grab one of these instead. However, there are some benefits to having your own built like this. You know for a fact that it's dialed in. This one's dialed in to some extreme weird accuracy that I'll probably never need, but I know it's there. I also like the fact that I have safer handles on the back that help me push and pull that, and you get better capacity in there as far as cross-cutting. If I needed to set up the stop block further away from the blade versus this one, while I rarely use it for cross-cutting that much longer stock, it is handy to have when you need it. So what's the price difference if you decided to build one like this versus buy the Powertec? It's kind of surprising, actually. I thought it would be different. So the Powertec is $119 most of the time. Link in the description, pinned comment, you want to check it out. So for this CrossCut sled, you need about a 1/4 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood. I like to use a better grade of plywood, so about $80 a sheet, so about $20 worth of that plywood is what it's going to cost you in plywood. A single piece of T-track is going to cost you about $15. The stop block itself is about $14. The dovetail clamps are $45 for a pair. The dovetail hardware is $15, so you can make your own fence. And the dovetail bit to route those dovetails, if you don't have that already, is going to be 25 bucks. The 1-inch dowel rod, I could find one on Amazon for about $15. That brings the grand total to $149 to build your own CrossCut sled, and that doesn't include glue and the time to build it. But you've built it. It's something that you've done and you've accomplished in your shop. You didn't have to buy anything. That's one of the benefits and the satisfaction of doing it yourself. And it has a few features that the Powertec doesn't have. However, if you're on a budget or if you just don't want to fool with building one, this Powertec for $120 is a very good option and a very good value, in my opinion, for everything that you're getting with this sled. Saw blades can be very confusing when you start woodworking to figure out which one of these do I buy. Have you ever went into the store and tried to pick out a saw blade? There's so much confusion about the terminology as well as the tooth count. In this video, we're going to cover all of that so you're more comfortable buying the right saw blade for your shop. Let's go. I've been able to use a bunch of different types of saw blades over the years to figure out what works best. I've used box store blades, I've used cheap blades, I've used very expensive blades, but there are some that just work better than others no matter what the cost is, and I want to recommend some of those to you as well. If you'd like to check out any of the blades I talk about today, there'll be a link in the description and the pinned comment to help you find them easier. First, let's cover the terminology around saw blades because that's the most confusing part. If you're shopping online or you're in the store, you may see letters beside the saw blade that say FTG or ATB, TCG, ATBR. It sounds like the Jackson 5 when they were singing the ABC song. It's just, there's so many letters, like what are we doing here? All those have a meaning and a purpose for the blade, and all they are, it tells you what type of teeth are on that blade. For instance, FTG, all that means is flat tooth grind. It just means it's going to be a flat tooth on the top, so when you make a pass through the wood, it's going to make a flat cut. Flat. Huh. Didn't get me. Typically where you'll see the FTG is something like a ripping blade, a 24 tooth blade. It will have that flat tooth grind. The flat tooth is really designed for basically hogging out a bunch of material really fast. It doesn't necessarily make the cleanest of cuts, especially on cross cutting, but you can use that flat tooth for dados, things like that, or just ripping boards faster, easier, less burning. ATB is alternative top bevel, and you'll see a left slope and a right slope on alternate blades. And so what that's doing is basically taking a slice of the wood over and over and over, and you'll actually see that in the cut, especially if you cut a groove. You'll see how it's kind of V'd on there, or even from the top side view, you'll see how it's making that kind of a V groove as it's cutting through. Typically, you'll see that ATB in something like a 40 tooth blade or a multi-purpose blade, because it can do both cross cutting and rip cutting. And we'll show you the results of that in just a minute. You may see TCG, which is triple chip grind. And all that is, you'll have one flat tooth and then one tooth that has bevels on both sides, plus a little bit of flat on top. And it creates kind of a unique shape in the kerf, basically just like a little ridge in there. You'll typically use that type of tooth on something like laminates or even aluminum or some other metals. And then finally, you may see ATBR. This is basically what they call a combination blade. It has the teeth of a ripping blade, the flat tooth grind, and it has the alternative bevel, so it's just a combination of those two. One thing to keep in mind though is all of these acronyms and things like that doesn't really matter for the beginner woodworker, because most of the time you don't care about this stuff. You just want to cut the wood and cut it cleanly, and I'm going to tell you the exact blade you need for that. Before we go any further, just get a 40 tooth general purpose blade. These are some of the best blades you could buy for general purposes. The reason you would want a 24 tooth or even an 80 tooth blade are very different from this one, which we'll cover, but this will do almost everything you're going to need. I personally like something like a mid-grade style blade versus the very expensive blades or even the very cheap blades. I've used very cheap blades in the past that you just pick up at the box store. The problem is they don't last as long as far as the sharpness goes, and then your cut quality goes downhill pretty quick. There's two blades I'll recommend. A 40 tooth Wood River blade from Woodcraft. If you have a local Woodcraft, go check it out, or just pick one up online. It's going to run you somewhere around $80, probably a little less actually. Or, and I've recommended these for a long time, CMT Orange Chrome. I like these blades. Not the ITK Extreme. Those are more in line with your box store style blades like Diablo, things like that, which Diablo works fine if that's working for you, and those are accessible to you, budget, and just pick one up at the store. Perfectly fine to use those. I'm just telling you, these last quite a bit longer as far as the sharpness goes, and they just perform better overall, in my opinion. The CMT blade will run you about $90-ish, so it is a decent investment. Or you could pick up something like a Diablo or Spider or something like that locally for 20 or 30 bucks. Just depends on your budget and how you're using your tools. The next thing you may see on your blade when you're trying to pick one out at the store or online is kerf. All kerf means is how thick is the blade. Now, you may also see glue line rip blades. All that means is they're thinner kerfs, meaning they're going to take less material. Now, a thin kerf blade is really good on underpowered saws. So like contractor saws, benchtop style saws. If you can find a thin kerf in the tooth count that you want, this will really help your saw perform a lot better. Or if you just need to take off less material on a bigger saw, that's where the thin kerfs really come in. Typically, the kerf of the blade is about 1/8 inch, give or take, on most standard table saw blades. There's also a hollow grind or HG. I don't think I've ever used one of those, but they're out there. On the hollow grind, you just basically got one that's a point and one that's kind of coned out. One thing you may notice on saw blades that I always found interesting, see that little question mark looking thing? Or J looking, like almost all blades have them, or some version of those. Some have like a copper insert on there. These Wood River ones have that copper insert. You get bonus points if you can comment and tell me what that little J is called. We'll see if you're right at the end of the video. Now there's two types of cuts you're going to be making with your saw blades. Either a rip cut, which all that means is you're going to cut with the grain, rip it with the grain, or cross cut, which means you're going across the grain. Even on plywood, plywood veneers have a grain pattern. You will see it when you look at it, the grain pattern running long ways, that's with the grain. If you cut across that, that's across the grain. How do you choose the right blade for the material you're going to cut? Well, I did the test just to show you exactly what results you're going to get. First off, let's look at a 24 tooth ripping blade. These are the ones that have a lot of space between each blade, and that is on purpose. It's got 24 teeth around this thing. Between those two teeth, that little notch there is called a gullet. And what that's for is when you're cutting big, thick stock, all of those chips get kind of piled in there before it gets thrown out under the saw or down in the dust collection. It is to remove more material, and that's what these ripping blades are absolutely amazing at. And so if you're using a 24 tooth blade, You can use it for cutting smaller stuff like plywood or even this pine you see here. It'll produce a pretty clean cut with the grain. But if you go across the grain, that's where you're really going to see a lot of tear out, some fraying, things like that, especially on plywood, stuff like that. So if you don't want to do cross cutting with a ripping blade, because it is to rip down the grain of the board. Now where the 24 tooth really shines is when I cut this thick piece of walnut, it glides really smooth. You don't have to put a lot of pressure on it at all. The blade just cuts through the wood really nicely, and you don't see any burning or anything like that on the edge of the wood. You'll see some burning in a later clip when we talk about some higher tooth count blades doing this same operation. Now my favorite blade is the 40 tooth blade. I like the general purpose blade because that's what's on my saw almost 95% of the time. I rarely change it unless I'm doing a bunch of ripping on really thick stock. Or if I'm doing a lot of cross cutting, I may go to a higher tooth count. But this 40 tooth blade, 40 or 50 tooth or combination blades, you can use those as well. But I really like the 40 tooth general purpose because it does all things well. It's kind of like the best of both worlds. You can rip cut with it like you see here. I ripped this pine. I ripped down the plywood. It cut just fine. Everything looks good. Really clean cut there, so you have no issues there. And then when you cross cut on the pine and on the plywood, you see here, both of these cuts are really nice and clean. That's with a 40 tooth general purpose. Really, if you're gonna invest any money into a blade or blades, I would highly recommend as a beginner, just grabbing a 40 tooth blade. You'll be happy with that for a long time. So why then would you pick up something like these, a 60 or even an 80 tooth? These are really good for laminates as well as plywoods. As you see here, you can rip with them on plywood or on thinner stock. It'll make a good, nice, clean cut. You can also cross cut on those, and it makes a really good, clean cut on those as well. So if you're building a bunch of cabinets, things like that, a good high tooth count blade is really gonna shine for you. However, if you use this to try to cut thicker stock, as you see here, first off, it's very difficult to push the stock through that blade. You have to use quite a bit of force, and it's taxing the motor on your table saw a lot more too because there's so many more teeth trying to cut through that wood. And another thing you're going to see is burning on the edge of the wood. Because the friction's building up on this blade, it's going to burn that wood, especially on lighter color woods like maple, pine even, and you can even see it here on this walnut. And you can see a massive difference in the rip cut on thicker stock we're using this high tooth count blade versus the lower 24 tooth count blade. So it really depends on what you're cutting as to what blade you're going to choose. But again, the 40 tooth general purpose blade is what most people is going to run on their saws almost all the time. Even a lot of professional wood shops are going to use that 40 tooth blade. And speaking of professional quality blades, there are some very high-end blades out there, and if you want to take a look at a couple of those, a lot of people love these two blades right here. The Forest Woodworker 2, this is one of the most popular blades on the market. It's also really expensive, so prepare yourself before you go look. As well as the Ridge Carbide. These are extremely nice blades. I run this Ridge Carbide a lot over the last year or so. It's been a really good blade. So if you're interested in one of those, I'll also link those. So why would you pay more for these versus something like the Wood River or even the CMT blade? I'll get a lot of pushback for this. I hadn't seen a whole lot of difference. You can resharpen some of these more often than others because they have more carbide on those, on the tips there, that when you send them off, they can resharpen them over and over and over. So you may get more actual life out of these blades here. But for my purposes, what I've always run on my saw has always been kind of the mid-grade blades. Other than when I was a beginner starting out, I used some of the more budget-friendly blades. When I was able to afford the more mid-grades, that's what I've been using. And I just prefer those just based on cost. $150 to $160 per blade, it just stings too much. So I wind up going with the other. But if you like these blades, you do you. Another blade that you'll eventually want to pick up for your table saw, if it accepts it, is a dado stack. Now these are two of the most popular ones, in my opinion. This is Freud. These make really good dado stacks. And then the new CMT locking dado stack. These are touted to be safer because they lock together, as well as the only one that's EU compliant with their regulations. Basically, the EU regulated regular dado stacks out of existence, or at least made it very difficult to get your hands on them in the EU. CMT kind of fixed that. There's a whole video if you want to go check that out. Just search CMT 731 illegal. I think you'll find it that way. But where these shine at is cutting wide grooves in board. So if you're doing a lot of half flaps, or even if you're building a lot of cabinetry with some dados that fit together perfectly, or box joints, anything like that, this is what you're going to want to save you a ton of time. Now these can tax certain table saws really hard because they are taking off so much material each pass, but they do save you a ton of time. So I'll link to these if you're interested. What if your saw doesn't accept a dado stack? In other words, the arbor isn't long enough. What then? Well, you can actually do a dado style cut with this blade, the 24 tooth, remember? Because it has that flat tooth grind, the flat top, you can cut grooves, dados in boards that have flat bottoms. And that's what you want, because if you try to put together a board that using an alternative tooth grind blade, what winds up happening is there's little ridges up in there that's just not going to sit flat, and you're going to be able to see that from the side, especially if you can see the joinery. This, you won't have that problem, because if you take small passes, just move it over a tiny bit at a time, it's going to create the same groove all the way across. It's going to be perfectly flat on the bottom. And a lot of people, including myself, before I got a dado stack, used something like this to create dados. So now if you wanted to pick up two blades that'll pretty much do whatever you want, pick up a 24 tooth ribbon blade as well as a 40 tooth combination. You're going to be golden for most things. One thing to keep in mind is no matter where you're at in your journey, a lot of us, I know because I've been there, we're going to walk into the local Home Depot or Lowe's, we're going to grab something like this, the Diablo blade, Spider, whatever your store's selling. I use these for a long time. These are the Diablo blades. I think they're really good. I think they're probably one of the better options for blades out there for those on a budget, because you can get them fairly inexpensive. But the reason I steer most people to something like the mid-grade, the CMT, the Wood River, things like that, is because of experience. These dull quite a bit faster than these, the mid-grade. And these work really well. Out of the box, for several cuts, you're gonna be perfectly fine. You're gonna be happy. You're gonna get good, clean cuts. But at some point, they're going to start dulling, and that's where I think that the other ones just outperform them in the long run. But if you're on a budget, there's nothing wrong with those. But one thing I do want you to be cautious of is, because I've done it, when I first got my miter saw, the DeWalt miter saw, I was so happy to get it. I started making cuts, and I was like, I'm not getting really good cuts on there. Why? Because the miter saw and most table saws come with subpar blades. They're really cheap, they're really dull. They just don't cut well. Especially on miter saws, what you're getting is a blade meant for rough construction, for framing up houses and things like that. They're not meant for woodworking. You can upgrade that blade to something like a higher tooth count. On miter saws, I highly recommend an 80 or 90 tooth blade, because almost always you're doing cross cutting on your miter saw. You're gonna get much cleaner cuts. I love the CMT 80 tooth blade. That's what I run on my miter saw. That's what's on that miter saw up there right now. And then here is a backup one that I have here. You may also see hook or rake, and all that is the angle of the tooth in relation to the blade. Positive hook will lean forward on the blade, a negative hook obviously the other way, and then there may be also a zero or neutral rake or hook, whichever way you want to call it. Positive are a little more aggressive, so you'll probably see those on things like your ripping blades, stuff like that. Negative, a lot of times you're going to see that on miter saw blades. A negative rake will create smoother cuts with a slower speed rate. So in other words, miter saws, when you're taking it real slow, you're going to get that smooth cut, whereas on a ripping blade, you're going a little bit faster. You may also see bore, and most of the time you're going to see a table saw that says 5/8 bore. All that means is the hole size that goes onto your table saw. Almost all your table saws are 5/8 arbors. So where you put the blade on that bolt, that's the bore. So that's all that means. On miter saws, a lot of those are 1 inch. If you're outside the US, you may see millimeters. We don't use those. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about your table saw blades, your miter saw blades, even your circular saw blades, is they do need regular maintenance, and that's something I typically sometimes neglect. However, I've recently purchased this Micro Jig blade clean system. This thing's awesome. All you do is buy some Simple Green. It has a scrubbing pad. It has a magnetic handle that sticks to any of your blades. This allows you to put this in there and then just turn it, and it's scrubbing the junk off the blade. Especially if you're cutting a lot of pine, things like that, that sap and the heat that's being generated by the friction, the sap will build up on there, and you'll think your blade is dull when it's really just dirty. I've done that several times when I was a beginner. I would think I needed a new blade, even the Diablo line of blades, things like that. I would think, oh man, I gotta get another blade. It was just dirty. All you gotta do is clean it, and you'll be back up in business. I think you'll be shocked at how much better your blades perform when they're clean. I know a lot of people, I got a good friend that every time he uses a saw blade, after every project, at the end of the day, he takes it off and cleans it and puts it back on. If you're that type person, awesome. I'm not, but when it starts kind of getting a little dull or my cuts aren't as clean as I think they should be, clean them dudes up, you'll be back in business. Remember the little J or the question mark looking thing? That is called an expansion slot. Not only does it help dissipate the heat, it also absorbs the shock, things like that. When the saw blade first makes contact with the stock, it will dissipate that throughout the saw blade using that little slot. It's kind of a neat little feature. This also helps control expansion and contraction and can prevent your table saw or your any saw blade from warping because of that. Kind of cool. And almost every saw blade you see is going to have one of some sort. Diablos are a little different as they're just little squigglies inside the blade, but serves the same purpose. I also think there's actually a name people call that thing, but if you know, let me know, other than expansion sled. One thing to keep in mind is that most table saw blades have this information printed on them. For instance, the CMT blades, it has the rake on there. It also has all of the tooth count information, everything you're going to need printed on there. Most of these table saw blades will have that information so you can see it at a quick glance. And if you're looking at circular saw blades, all of these principles still apply. High tooth count for more cross-cutting, low tooth count for more ripping, and then you can always find more of a general purpose tooth count blade. And you're looking at a 40 to 50 tooth there as well. And if you're a beginner, one thing to keep in mind that I messed up when I was starting out is you don't have to over tighten these blades when you put them on. They just need to be snug. It doesn't matter if you got 2 wrenches with your table saw like this. Some have a button that lock the arbor and then you tighten the nut down. Just snug, not loose, just give it a little snug. I over tightened one on an old table saw that I had and like to have never got that thing off because it was just too tight. So make sure you just snug it up. You don't want it to come loose. You don't want it to be a pain to get off of there. Snug and then a little. That's what I do. A smidge, snug and a smidge. These 5 table saw upgrades will help you work safer, get cleaner cuts, and even work faster. Efficiency is king. Let's go. First on the list is the, well, everybody knows what this is. It's a micro jig gripper, probably one of the most popular push blocks on the market. Well, they've improved it. This is the Gripper Plus. And there's a couple of changes here. One primarily being it's now at a lower price. We like lower prices. Let me show you what it can do. If you've been living under a rock and you don't know what the gripper is, it's one of the best push blocks on the market in my opinion. I've been using one for years. This one's mine. I bought it. Here it is. I love it. Great. I use it almost every time I use the table saw. For one, it has an adjustable base under there that will allow you to get over the top of the blade and push this across without worrying about your hand getting in the blade. We don't want that. That'd be bad. It also has an adjustable foot here or leg, or whatever you want to call that. It'll drop down. That way if you're cutting thicker stock, it does still allow you to keep balance on this push block. And this allows you to do 3 directions of pressure to keep a safer cut. Down, as well as toward the fence and away from you or through the blade. So you're getting those 3 essential directions of pressure so you can get a good, accurate, and clean cut. That's where the gripper has always shined. It's an amazing tool. Love it. This new Gripper Plus adds a little sight window that lets you know where this middle leg is so you don't cut into it. In other words, you'll know at a glance where the blade's going to be in relation to this push block. I like this little feature. Typically you're using this push block when you're trying to make cuts and you need to be closer to the fence. That's where this really shines, and that's why this little window works so well. Right now I've got my fence set on 2 inches. If this sight window covers up the 2-inch mark, then we know that it's going to hit this center leg. If we can move this away outside that 2-inch mark or in toward the fence and it not cover up the 2 inches, then this will be clear. Still the gripper you know and love with an added feature and a lower price. You can't complain when they add stuff to it and they lower the price. I like that a lot. Now this was sent to me by my friend over at Tay Tools to check out, but I don't keep this and no money changed hands. I will be giving this away to one of my 2 Before Nation members. If you'd like to know more about that, link in the description. Oh, and this is optional. If you don't like that sight window on there, you don't have to put it on, but you still get it at the lower price. Next on the list, protecting the table saw top. This is probably one of the most common questions I get. How do you prevent rust from getting on the table saw top or any cast iron top, really? There's a few methods here that you can use depending on your budget and how much elbow grease you really want to put into it. First and foremost, you could always use paste wax. I used that for quite a long time on the Delta table saw that I had. It works okay. The day you put it on, it's amazing, and then 3 days later, it's kind of gone. It just rubs off, especially if you use your table saw a lot. It will not last very long. You just have to reapply more often. That will help prevent rust on the table saw. Second method, there's a product called Bow Shield T9. I've used that before on the channel and it works pretty well. It's a Teflon coating. And again, the same thing with that. It has to be reapplied fairly often for it to be effective at keeping rust off as well as keeping that smooth glide that we all want. And the third method that I'm using today is called Carbon Method. Now, I'm not sponsored. I bought this myself. Full disclosure, they did offer to sponsor a video and I declined it because I wanted to try it for myself and see how good it was because I've seen a bunch of videos out there on this stuff and well, I'm I'm always a skeptic of some of this kind of stuff, so I wanted to try it. So here we go. First thing you have to do is remove any rust and previous oils or finishes or protectants you put on your table saw. What I like to use, I've used these for a long time on several table saws, it's called sand flakes. These are hand sanding blocks. It's basically a giant chunk of just sanding material, and it's like an eraser that you used to use in school, one of those big ones. It's like that. That's why I like them. Now it comes in coarse, medium, and fine. I like the 3-pack that I picked up here because I can take the coarse and get off any rust spots or any glue spots or anything that's gotten on top of this surface. That'll take those off. Then the medium kind of buffs those down a little more, and then the fine polishes it out. It does take a little elbow grease. It'll take you a little time, but these are effective non-chemical removers for rust. These are fantastic to have in the shop. As far as the carbon method goes, once you get your surface prepped, in other words, use those sand blocks, whatever method you're using to get rust off, or just get all those old finishes off, the next thing you want to do is clean it with some isopropyl alcohol or mineral spirits or something like that. Just pour it on a rag and wipe that off. It's just going to remove anything that was left over, dirt, grime, and some of that old protectant. Once that's done, there's a bottle of carbon cleanse. We're going to use that. We're going to spray it on, and we'll just wipe it off with a regular rag. Do that a few times, and then that's going to remove the remainder of any grit and things like that. This goes with the carbon method, so it's one of the 3-step process here we're going to be using. Next is to put down the carbon coating. You always want to use gloves with any of this stuff. It's why I'm wearing mine. This stuff is so easy to put on. Like anybody can do it. You could use it on any surface in your shop that is metal. Now what you want to do is work in sections. The table saw is laid out in 4 sections: left, middle, right, and then extension wing. You're just going to put this stuff on your sponge pad fairly liberally. You're not soaking it, but you do want some on there. Then you're just going to pull it down one side of the saw. They call it a well line. You pull that down, and then you're going to work out from there towards the center until that's perfectly coated. And what I do is I just go back over it. You can overlap each pass so that you know you're getting it fully coated, and you'll be able to see with the reflection that it's actually fully coated on there. I also did my miter bars. I just turned it on the side, rubbed it down in there. We'll do this all the way across the saw. And don't worry about getting it on the throat plate. It's perfectly fine to get put on there. It's not going to hurt anything. Now this layer is actually what I would assume is the protectant layer. In other words, this is what's protecting your saw from rust, because there's another layer that we're going to put on after this that will help make things glide. Again, we can put it on our extension wing too, because it's just going to help things glide along smoother. And that's what we're really after here. Other than the protectant, we want things to just slide on this saw. It just makes it safer, easier to use. After it's applied, you're probably supposed to just do one section at a time. I went ahead and done the whole saw because I've got temperature controlled in here. It's not drying overly fast. If you start feeling it get kind of tacky while you're working with it, you'll want to go ahead and jump to this step. This kit comes with the sponge and everything you need, gloves and the microfiber cloth. This is the microfiber. Fold it in 4s, and then you're going to just start buffing it off. Wax on, wax off.
Wax on, wax off.
You'll be able to see when it's buffed in good too. It's pretty easy to tell. We're only going to use that one side for that section, and then you'll just flip it over and use the other side for the next section. Same thing for the next 2. You're just going to flip it inside out and use the side you haven't used yet. You just want to make sure you're removing any excess that may be on the surface. Now, I did 3 coats. You can do 4 or 5, however many you feel comfortable or want to do. I think 3 is plenty. I think they recommend 3 to 4. And then you're going to let that cure for 24 hours. Once 24 hours is done, you're going to come back with this carbon glide. This is what makes it slick as owl snot. This is what you need to make your boards just slip on there. And then we're going to put this on after this cures. All right, 24 hours later, you'll come back and you'll put on the carbon method carbon glide. This is a friction reducer for metal. All that's going to do, it's going to make it's like an air hockey table now. It's going to make your tabletop slick as owl snot. If you've never heard that, if you don't know what that means, it's slick. Like it'll slip and slide, and that reduces the friction, so it's going to make your table saw cut better. It's going to be easier to use, easier to push the wood through the blade. It's just all around good option for you, and it's also rust protected now. I like this product. It's pretty good. I got a confession to make. I'm not one of those guys that spends hours maintaining things, cleaning things. I should, but I don't put a lot of priority on it. What I like is a product I can use and I don't have to worry about it for quite a long time. And that's what I like about this carbon method, is it's on there and I don't have to worry about it. If it starts getting a little bit slicker, not slick enough, I can just reapply this carbon glide, spray it on, wipe it off. I'm back to the races, and the carbon coat is still on there. Should last a very long time, and I don't have to worry about it anymore, or for a long time anyway. I mean, I know some guys, they spend hours washing their vehicle or truck or whatever. They shine it all up and it just looks pristine. I'm not that guy. I wash mine ever so often and I'm all right. And one thing I'd like to point out on this carbon method stuff, this is one application and I still have over half a bottle of the carbon coat and probably over half a bottle of each of these. So I know I can at least get one more coating out of this should I need to do it down the road. Another way to prevent rust on a table saw is to simply add a dehumidifier to your shop. I talked in detail about this in my shop upgrades video that I'll link in the description. You should go check it out after this one. But that will really reduce the amount of humidity in the air so there's not as much moisture, so the moisture's not getting on your saw, so your saw's not rusting. And if you're in a hot environment like I am in South Arkansas, it really does help. It's a dry heat then versus the humid heat. One of the easiest upgrades you can make to your table saw to make it cut cleaner, better, is just to keep the blades clean. Now there's a bunch of ways to do it. In the past I had a steel brush and some simple green and it just makes a mess. I bought this a few weeks ago. This is the simplest system that you can buy to keep the blade clean. It's all inclusive, so everything's in here self-contained, so my cleaner stays in here. Anytime I need to clean my blade, I can drop it in here and do so quickly. Let me show you. Oh, and it will do router bits too, which we'll get to. Self-contained, so the lid pops right off. I'm using simple green for mine. I like this cleaner. It's very inexpensive. It lasts a long time. This is what I use, so I just dump it straight in there. You can dilute it if you so choose. Some people do. I do not. This is a self-contained unit, so everything stays together. You're not gonna lose anything. Be looking for it. Where'd my magnetic handle go? Oh, it does have a magnetic handle. Stick that right on your blade, put that in there. You're gonna turn it counterclockwise, or away from the direction that the teeth typically cut. And there's a scrub or a scouring pad in the bottom of this that's scrubbing those teeth. And if there's anything that's stuck on there that needs a little extra attention, there is an included brass brush. It's brass, not metal. Brass won't damage your carbide teeth. You can get in there and clean those even more. I like this. Take it out, flip it over, do the other side. This white side blade that I had was pretty dirty, and you can see it looks like brand new now. It got all that funk off there. Just a good all-around way to clean your blade. Now it's not waterproof. I do wish they would make it like sealed up top, so if I dumped it over sideways, it wouldn't spill out, but it will, so just keep this flat. One added bonus that they put in here that I'm glad they thought of is this top piece here where you can put your router bits. 1/4 or 1/2 inch, it has a space for those. I put this round over and chamfer bit in there and let them sit for about 5 minutes, just let them soak. Took them out, took the little wire brush, hit them just a minute or two. Now these look like brand new because there was some pitch built up on that as well. All in all, I think somebody will look at this, they'll go look at the price and kind of balk because it is around $100 for this, but everything is included here that you need. Well, almost everything. You get the scour pad, you get the brush, you get the magnetic handle, you can clean your router bits and your saw blades. It looks like up to 12 inches easy on the saw blades. And then the smaller blades will fit in there as well, your 8 1/4. And the only thing you gotta add is whatever cleaner you prefer. And then you have a self-contained unit, you can put it on the shelf, or I'm gonna slide mine under this toolbox back here, and it's ready to clean blades anytime I need them clean. You'll notice a massive difference on the way your blades cut when they're clean versus when they're dirty. They also include these scouring pads that you can use on your rotary tool if you have one. And that will basically, it's the same thing as the scouring pad in the bottom of this. That's meant to clean your bits and things like that with. So if you have a rotary tool, this might be handy for you. Before we get to the magic bucket, that's magic sawdust. Before we get to the magic bucket, you gotta check this out. I had no idea this existed, and it could be just what you've been looking for to upgrade your table saw. This is the Rockler small part sled. Out of the box, extremely easy to set up. You literally pull it out of the box there. You're gonna put a miter bar on there. This is an aluminum miter bar, should fit any 3/4 inch size miter slot. And there's adjustment screws, little nylon screws in there that you can adjust any slop that might be there to fit your miter slot. Now this will also fit on job site saws, not just a cabinet saw. As you see here, sitting on this DeWalt 8 1/4 saw, it actually fits on these perfect. Perfect. So if you're cutting a lot of small parts, especially on these small saws, this might be a must-have. Now the first thing you're going to do once you get the miter bar bolted on there, you want to make sure you put the blade guard on. The blade guard sticks off the back and that prevents you from accidentally cutting your hand with that blade. This is a must. You must put this on there. It's a rule. Outlaw rule number 304. You also want to make sure that your blade isn't too high because, especially on saw stops, you don't want to hit that aluminum because if your hand is touching the aluminum and the blade touches the aluminum, yeah, you triggered the saw stop. Also, that's what's holding the two parts together once you make the cut. But if you ensure that the blade's not too high, you're gonna make that first pass. You're cutting a 0 clearance into your sled. From there, there's a piece of MDF that comes with it that slides into a groove. You're gonna put that in there, put 2 screws in it because from the bottom, that's gonna hold that in place. Then you're gonna make another cut. You could probably get away with putting the MDF in there and making 1 cut instead of 2, but They say to, so I did. Now there is enough of this MDF left, so if you booger this up in some way or you change blades and you need a thicker blade or a thinner blade and you want a different zero clearance, then there's enough there to reset it. Once that's done, there's a piece of composite material here. It says Rockler on it. You're gonna push that up against the blade and screw in 2 screws, and that gives you the zero clearance. That zero clearance is gonna help prevent tear out. From there, I'll run it through one more time just to kind of shave off anything that might be touching on that composite. It also comes with this miter stop. It's just a miter bar that expands when you screw it down. Prevents you from pushing this sled too far so that you don't expose the blade. That's also a rule. We'll call that rule 303. You also get a composite T-track clamp. And the reason I keep calling this stuff composites is because none of it's aluminum except the T-tracks on there. So you should not cut into the T-tracks. This other composite material is just plastic. So even if you cut into this clamp, it's not going to hurt anything other than the clamp. But there is a clamp here for very, very small pieces. So if I'm cutting little pieces off and I can actually hold it down on the left, you can still use the clamp. But if you're comfortable holding it down, you can chop off small pieces like this. But once they get down to very, very small, you do not want your finger very close to the blade. Even this blade guard has a lip to kind of prevent your finger from getting up in there. I think this is genius because they kind of thought of everything here. The clamp, the zero clearance, the composite material, the blade guard, and it fits on basically any table saw with a standard 3/4 inch slot. This is one of those things that it's just great to have because what's going to happen is, and I have tried it, cutting very small pieces at the miter saw is very dangerous. I've actually broke this thumb. It still hurts. To this day, I can literally mash it right now and it hurts. I broke it 3 or 4 years ago because I was trying to cut a very small piece like a dummy at a miter saw. I knew it didn't feel right in the gut, but I still made the cut and it kicked back and it broke the thumb. It's not a place to make small parts. If you don't have a small handsaw or something that you can cut very small parts with, this is what you need, and it's better to have it and not need it, and need it and not have it. If you like this video, you'll love that one right there. A lot more woodworking tips and tricks 99% of beginners don't know. Click in that box, get you the big old virtual fist bump.